I didn't need to look. I knew it was my mother, Lady Irene. A deep sense of peace allowed me to relax. I realized I didn't need to act like a son. My instincts accepted this comfort naturally. My child, Lady Irene whispered, I watched you work earlier. You have grown into such a steady, responsible lord. Her voice turned tender. But please, don't work yourself to death. It breaks my heart. I looked up and took my mother's hand as she massaged my shoulders. Her palms were warm, contrasting with my own hands, which were chilled from hours of handling cold documents and maps. The temperature difference stirred a sense of warmth within me. Looking at her concerned face, I offered a genuine, dependent smile and whispered, Thank you, Mother. It's been so long since someone cared for me like this. The subtle vulnerability in my voice pained Lady Irene. She gripped my cold hands firmly, offering her warmth. Silly child, there's no need to thank me. Whenever you're tired, come to me. I'll be here to help and listen. She added with a playful, hopeful smile. Though soon, perhaps Princess Louise will be the one to relieve your stress. Marriage means you won't be alone. Having someone to care for you is a wonderful feeling. I know from experience. She continued, hoping to brighten my mood. When I accompanied your father to the royal capital, I met Princess Louise at a banquet. She was young then, but already gentle, beautiful, and well-educated. She will not only care for you, but perhaps offer valuable insights into your political affairs. You should try discussing matters with your future wife. You might find it unexpectedly helpful. I listened quietly, but her well-meaning words left a bitter aftertaste. She was unaware of Charlotte or the cold, forced nature of my marriage to the princess. I couldn't bear to shatter her beautiful illusions, as it would be too cruel to a mother who loved me so deeply. Suppressing a sigh, I maintained a shy, calm expression and replied, I understand, Mother. I am looking forward to our life together. I spoke lightly, feigning the expected shyness, though I alone knew the heavy burden behind my words. I squeezed her hand tighter, drawing strength from this final sanctuary of family. In the Lord's Hall of Frostguard, the Solon leader Harold sat at a heavy oak table after a lengthy Legion Council meeting. 6 Legion commanders bowed to Harold and exited in silence. Only the seat of the Sparrow Legion remained empty. Commander Ulf was absent, citing unhealed wounds. As the last footsteps faded, the hall fell into a heavy, crackling silence. Harold leaned back into his bear fur chair, his weathered face unreadable. His sharp gaze swept the hall before settling on a massive map detailing their recent southern raids. Though the defeat at Conford Mountain stung, it was eclipsed by the overall success of the campaign. Compared to the massive spoils of the raid, the Conford setback was trivial. His legions had returned with vast quantities of gold, silk, and grain. Most importantly, they brought back 80,000 Plantagenet captives. These survivors, mostly young and strong, would solve Solon's long-standing labor shortages in agriculture and construction. This victory cemented Harold's authority within the tribal alliance. He used the Sparrow Legion's failure at Conford as a pretext to discipline the defiant Commander Ulf. During the post-war council, Harold turned the rewards ceremony into a disciplinary hearing. He demoted Ulf 3 ranks, stripped him of his 3 elite combat units, and denied the Sparrow Legion their fair share of spoils. This effectively crippled Ulf's influence. The once arrogant Ulf had become silent, now avoiding even the most critical meetings. Harold sneered at this passive resistance. He didn't care. A toothless eagle was no longer a threat. With internal dissent crushed, he focused on the lingering irritation, the failure at Conford. Reports confirmed over 6,600 casualties, including those lost to wounds and disease. Over 3,200 were elite Solon combat soldiers, a significant blow to his core strength. Harold was increasingly wary of the young Lord of Conford. Intelligence showed that since arriving last year, I had remained undefeated against Solon forces. This anomaly demanded Harold's full attention. Spies revealed I was the son of the wealthy Duke Schmidt. Furthermore, the formidable knight Friedrich, who had plagued them in the northern frontier, was indeed my brother. So too was the elusive and dangerous mage, Conrad. No wonder. Harold tapped the armrest, realizing the depth of the threat. They aren't just defending a barren outpost. They have the backing of the entire Schmidt family and the new northern province governor, Count Rochefort. He re-evaluated the strategic value of Confort. It was no longer just a border nuisance, but a forward fortress for the Plantagenet kingdom's northern ambitions. Despite his desire to crush Confort, Harold knew it wasn't the time for another major offensive. The spoils needed distribution, the captives required management, and the spring planting season was imminent. The Solon alliance needed time to recover its strength. Suppressing his urge for immediate retaliation, Harold chose a more subtle, long-term approach. He gestured to a shadow in the corner. "Go, bring me General Leon." Moments later, Leon entered the hall and bowed respectfully to Harold. Harold ordered directly, "General Leon, you know the situation in Confort well. That young lord, I have become a nuisance in our northern territory. I need intelligence on my troop deployments, internal conflicts, supplies, and defensive weaknesses. You understand the Plantagenet way. Use your connections to infiltrate Confort or bribe key figures. I need to know everything happening there." Leon bowed deeply. "As you command, Great Chief. I will arrange for infiltration immediately." "Good. Go," Harold waved. Watching Leon leave, Harold stared coldly at the map, his eyes fixed on Confort. Open warfare had paused, but a silent, more insidious conflict had begun. He needed to watch this young lord, find my flaws, and prepare for a decisive strike once Solon's strength recovered. Harold knew that while the Solon army was peerless in battle, their fatal weakness was their primitive, chaotic internal administration. Originating from the harsh northern steppes, the Solonians valued martial prowess and relied on looting to sustain their campaigns. They lacked all knowledge of governing occupied territories, developing sustainable economies, or pacifying conquered populations. Most regions remained under primitive tribal rule, with only core towns possessing rudimentary management. A lack of administrative talent led to constant rebellions and low resource efficiency, preventing looted wealth from becoming lasting military power. During the Southern Campaign, they had captured many Plantagenet officials, scribes, judges, engineers, and even low-ranking knights and nobles. Harold had previously viewed these people merely as spoils for ransom or slavery. But the failure at Confort changed his perspective. Martial strength alone could win battles, but not a lasting empire. He needed the knowledge locked in these captives' minds. "We Solonians excel at destruction, but for governance, we need teachers," Harold told his confidants coldly. "Learning from scratch is too slow. The teachers are already in our hands." He knew the risks of using turncoats, but he was confident in his control. Solon blades provided the threat, while granting these captives status and wealth far exceeding their previous lives would ensure their loyalty. Faced with survival and profit, he was certain these clever men would make the right choice. Harold ordered his guards, "Categorize all captured Plantagenet officials by their talents. I will summon them personally." "Yes, Great Chief," the guard captain replied. The hall was heavy with tension. Harold sat upon his massive stone throne, draped in a snow-bear pelt, looking down. A dozen captured Plantagenet officials were escorted into the hall by elite Solon warriors. Once men of standing, they now appeared humble and terrified. Led by a former count scribe, they knelt and pressed their foreheads to the cold stone. "We, the guilty, greet the Great Chief." Harold smiled with satisfaction. He noted their shaved heads, a mark of submission and a complete break from their past identities. They had been stripped of their silk robes and forced into crude Solon furs and leathers. The clothing was rough and aesthetically jarring, a clumsy imitation of nomadic style that looked hideous to any Plantagenet. Yet, wearing them was a silent declaration of their new status. Harold enforced this shaving and changing policy ruthlessly. He knew destroying their cultural pride was the first step toward mental submission, and their fearful posture proved it worked. The group included scribes, judges, engineers, and minor nobles, the exact administrative talent the Solon tribe desperately needed. "Merged into 18,168. Rise," Harold said, his voice surprisingly calm and gentle, not the savage roar they expected. "Take your seats." The captives trembled, barely believing their ears. They looked at each other, then cautiously stood and perched on the edge of wooden stools, backs stiff, unable to relax. Harold observed their shock, continuing in a smooth, pressured tone. "You are all capable officials selected by the Plantagenet Kingdom, each with your own expertise. Your defeat and loss of home are not your fault." He paused, scanning them. It was the incompetence and corruption of the Plantagenet king that invited this disaster. "You have done your best." These words shocked them. They had expected torture or death, not the reasonable, comforting tone of this barbarian leader. It shattered their perception of him. They bowed their heads, filled with complex emotions, relief, confusion, and a growing, uneasy suspicion of his true motives. This great chief was far deeper and more dangerous than they had imagined. Seeing his initial intimidation and manipulation take hold, Harold leaned forward. "I will be honest. Our southern campaign was not our desire, but a necessity. We lived peacefully in the north until King Heinrich X's harsh taxes and oppression forced us to fight for survival. My father was humiliated and forced to rise up. It was a matter of survival, nothing more." Harold gestured helplessly, claiming the Solon tribe was small and forced into this conflict by the Plantagenet Empire's overwhelming might. He shifted his tone, declaring that the gods favored the Solonians because the Heinrichs were corrupt tyrants who had lost the mandate of heaven. He credited Solon's victories to divine will rather than mere skill, lamenting that despite their desire for peace, the Plantagenet king's warmongering forced the conflict. This rhetoric, framing aggression as defense and victory as destiny, successfully swayed the surrendered officials, providing them with a justification for their betrayal. A scribe formerly under Count Eichberg sensed Harold's need for a public display of loyalty. He crawled forward, weeping and repenting, claiming he had been blinded by the Heinrich's decadence and now recognized Harold as the true, benevolent leader. He begged for a chance to serve and redeem his past sins. This performance perfectly suited Harold's agenda. Harold smiled kindly, helping him up and asking for his name and former position. The man identified himself as Albrecht, a minor scribe who had managed records and supplies for Count Eichberg. Praising the name, Harold ordered his guards to reward Albrecht with a jeweled scimitar, 100 gold coins, 3 fine northern horses, and 2 Plantagenet women. The guards promptly delivered the rewards. Overcome with greed and joy, Albrecht knelt again, pledging his life to Harold's service. Harold personally lifted him up, noting that while Solonians excelled in war, they lacked expertise in internal administration and agriculture. He tasked Albrecht with using his experience to help govern the newly conquered subjects and prosper the northern frontier. Feeling the weight of Harold's trust, Albrecht vowed to serve with his full capacity. Seeing Albrecht's success, the remaining officials' hesitation vanished. The desire for survival and wealth quickly overcame their lingering loyalty to the old regime. The hall filled with the sound of kneeling men. They scrambled to repent, claiming they too had been deceived by the puppet regime. They pledged to govern their lands for Harold, declaring him the true ruler. Harold sneered inwardly at their sycophancy while maintaining a benevolent facade. He knew the first phase of his recruitment was a success. These officials would be his tools to stabilize the occupied territories. As for loyalty, he knew these clever men would always choose the side of power and profit. As the officials departed, the tension in the hall eased. Sven stepped forward, questioning the wisdom of trusting such spineless men with administrative power. He feared they might betray them if the situation turned against the Solonians. Harold's expression turned cold and sharp. He dismissed Sven's concerns, noting that these men had long ago lost their spines to the Plantagenet court and Solon's blades. They were merely dogs looking for the highest bidder. He emphasized that the Solonians would retain control over all military power. The officials would only hold administrative or advisory roles, never the power to command troops or make final decisions. He added that rewarding them was a performance intended to influence other subjects. As long as Solon remained strong, these men would be obedient, though he knew they would be the first to turn if the tide shifted. Sven nodded, his doubts assuaged. He recognized this as a cold, pragmatic political maneuver. Harold shifted the topic to Conford, noting that I was surely working just as hard to recover. He acknowledged that his soldiers still feared the fortress, making a direct assault unwise. A failed attack would only deepen their fear and jeopardize their control of the northern frontier. However, He could not allow Conford to recover and grow stronger. If they waited, the cost of taking the fortress would only increase tenfold. Harold spread a map, marking the areas surrounding Conford. He ordered Sven to take his men and supplies to execute a strategic encirclement. He directed Sven to secure the Golden City to the northeast to deter border lords. He then pointed to Twin Rivers City, a vital node to the northwest, ordering it fortified to block Conford's expansion. Finally, he pointed to the ruins of Tyrol Fortress to the southwest. He declared it the key to the entire region, intending to restore the long-forgotten stronghold to choke Conford's access to the wealthy peninsula. Harold leaned forward, staring at Sven. "You are in charge here. Immediately draft the most skilled craftsmen, the most resilient slaves, and sufficient soldiers from all units. Restore Tyrol Fortress to basic functionality at any cost. It doesn't need to be as sturdy as Conford, but it must be able to garrison an army and control the pass. Lock down Tyrol before I realize its strategic value and seize or destroy it. Block Conford's path to the southwest completely." After issuing these orders, Harold traced circles on the map over the complex terrain surrounding Conford, the mountains, swamps, and valleys. Additionally, he added, establish small, secret outposts and supply points throughout the forests and valleys we control. They don't need large garrisons, just the ability to hide troops, store grain, and relay messages. Distribute our surplus, old, or captured weapons to the scattered tribes, hunters, and mountain folk who hold blood feuds with the Plantagenets. Arm them. Tell them that any Plantagenet farmer, logger, or scout crossing our borders to steal resources is to be killed on sight. He grinned coldly. For every Plantagenet head, soldier or civilian, brought to an outpost, I will pay 1 silver coin. If they capture them alive as slaves, I don't care. I just want results. Turn the forests around Conford into a bottomless pit that consumes Plantagenet lives. Make them fear sending out small parties. Let them feel eyes watching from the shadows and blades waiting behind trees. I will weave a web of fear and blood to suffocate Conford and stifle its growth. Drain their energy, delay their recovery, block their exits, and exhaust them with endless harassment. Harold stood up, finalizing his strategy. Until we gather enough strength to win, this is our strategy for Conford. Total strangulation and blockade, not a frontal assault. Do you understand, Sven? Sven was stirred by the ruthlessness and brilliance of the plan. He struck his chest firmly. Understood. I will depart immediately. I will reinforce the Golden City and Twin Rivers City, restore Tyrol Fortress, and arm the mountain tribes. Conford will have no chance to breathe or grow. Go. Harold waved him off. Sven saluted and strode out of the hall to begin the campaign of blockade and terror. With the conspiracy against Conford set, a heavier, more realistic problem haunted Harold. Cannons. Conford's cannons had been decisive. The Sparrow Legion's elite, pushing heavy shield carts, were decimated by the sudden, lethal roar of the fortress's artillery. The shield carts his craftsmen had painstakingly assembled were reduced to splinters by that precise, violent fire. Cannons. Harold rubbed his temples, whispering the word with a mix of hatred and longing. He had seen the power of Plantagenet cannons before, watching them tear through Solonian warriors during his youth. Back then, cannons were strategic weapons reserved for major sieges or grand battles. He never expected a remote, insignificant border fort like Conford to possess such formidable artillery. It signaled that the Plantagenet kingdom's investment in the northern frontier far exceeded his estimates. The Solon tribes were not entirely unfamiliar with firearms. Their southern campaign had been successful, capturing several key Plantagenet strongholds. In these, they had seized various cannons, from heavy fortress guns to lighter field pieces. They had also captured skilled gunners, but herein lay the problem. The Solon military tradition was rooted in mobile cavalry, curved blades, and individual valor. They lacked the knowledge and tradition to maintain these complex, steel beasts, which seemed too delicate for their nomadic lifestyle. The captured gunners, treated poorly, were either uncooperative or too terrified to work effectively. More importantly, the Solon army lacked the systemic awareness and skills to maintain firearms. Tasks like cleaning barrels, checking firing pins, and rust prevention were ignored by a culture accustomed to discarding what breaks and looting what is needed. Transporting the heavy cannons was another nightmare. During long marches, these heavy iron pieces were subjected to brutal handling. Lacking proper carriages, most cannons arrived with broken wheels or cracked barrels. Even those that arrived intact were dangerous to use. Due to poor maintenance and low-quality captured gunpowder, the cannons were prone to exploding. A bursting cannon was catastrophic, sending shrapnel through the ranks and killing both gunners and nearby infantry. Worse than the casualties was the blow to morale. The sound of a friendly cannon exploding could cause even the bravest soldiers to panic and break ranks. Consequently, Solon commanders feared these unreliable thunders and preferred traditional infantry and cavalry tactics. Harold had personally ordered the care of a 9-pound field gun brought to Confort. He had hoped it would breach the walls, but the tide of battle turned too quickly. They were forced into a chaotic retreat. In the panic, there was no time to save the heavy piece. To prevent it from falling into Plantagenet hands, they had to destroy it. A weapon that could have changed the war became a symbol of their failure. For a tribal alliance reliant on looting and simple crafts, manufacturing such complex war machines was an impossible chasm. Could they smuggle them? Harold shook his head. Plantagenet merchants might smuggle swords, armor, or the occasional flintlock musket, as these were tactical goods with looser oversight. But cannons were large, tracked, and strictly controlled. Smuggling them past checkpoints was a fantasy. Manufacturing them himself? Harold laughed at the thought. It was impossible. Producing cannons required advanced metallurgy, precision casting, quality control, and trained crews, all beyond their reach. The Solonians struggled to produce even quality steel plate armor, let alone cannons, which required a vastly superior industrial and knowledge base. This was not merely a resource issue, but a fundamental gap in industrial systems and expertise. As I grew increasingly frustrated, hurried footsteps echoed outside the Lord's Hall. Asgier burst in, his face alight with excitement. "Brother, I have news," Asgier announced. "I've recruited several Plantagenet craftsmen who arrived with the main force. They aren't ordinary smiths, they're experts in firearms. I've detained them quietly and brought them for your inspection." My eyes lit up. I sat bolt upright, staring at Asgier. "Firearm craftsmen? Are you certain?" "Almost certainly." Asgier nodded. "They can draft blueprints. Definitely not for horseshoes or plows." "Bring them." "No, wait," I said, regaining my composure. "I will go to them myself." I stood, gazing at the gloomy Frostguard sky. Perhaps the key to the cannon problem didn't need to come from outside. Asgier and I left the hall, walking through the cold stone corridors toward the craftsmen's quarters. "How did you find them? Are they reliable?" I asked. "I followed your orders, posting notices in our controlled towns and captured strongholds, offering high rewards for firearm and cannon experts," Asgier replied proudly. 2 men answered. "I questioned them on metallurgy, casting, and gunpowder ratios. They are genuine experts, not scammers." I patted Asgier's shoulder. "Well done, brother." I trusted my loyal, capable brother implicitly. We reached a secluded stone warehouse guarded by Asgier's personal guards. Inside, 7 or 8 apprentices and captives knelt on the floor. My gaze fell on 2 middle-aged men, ragged and terrified. I gestured for them to be brought forward. They collapsed to their knees, heads bowed. "Your names? Where are you from?" I asked, my tone stern yet controlled. Asgier barked. "Answer the great leader." The older man, fingers calloused, trembled. "I am Klaus, from Field Territory." The paler man added, "I am Richard, from Huenum." "Can you cast long-barreled copper cannons like those on the walls of Confort?" I asked. The 2 exchanged a terrified glance. Klaus ventured, "Do you mean the 6-pound Minerva cannon used by the Plantagenet army?" "Yes." "Can you build them?" Klaus looked pained. "That is incredibly difficult, great leader. It requires forging and welding high-quality copper plates. It takes 6 months per piece, with a very low success rate. I dare not promise, for fear of wasting your materials." My expression darkened. "So you cannot?" "No. I can use the clay mold casting method." Klaus pleaded. "It is simpler and faster. We could produce a dozen in a month." I was intrigued. "Explain." "We use clay and sand to create a solid core, then build a brick mold around it, Klaus explained. We pour molten iron into the cavity. Once cooled, we break the mold to reveal the rough cannon, then polish and bore it. These iron cannons are lighter, easier to transport, and safer than poorly made copper ones. Asgir's eyes lit up. Brother, this is perfect. Let them mass-produce these iron cannons. They are portable for mountain and forest warfare and will boost our firepower immediately. We can keep the copper cannons as a long-term goal. This solves our immediate need without wasting resources on risky projects. I agreed with my brother's logic. A pragmatist, I knew that solving the immediate need took priority over perfection. The Solan army desperately needed mobile, long-range support. These iron cannons were the solution. I felt a surge of pride for Asgir. Asgir was my half-brother, born to a Plantagenet slave. Their father had treated Asgir with cold indifference due to his lineage. I had raised him, teaching him to fight and watching him become a fierce legion commander. Their bond was the softest part of my heart. Asgir had never failed me. Agreed. I decided. I turned to the craftsman, my tone encouraging. Klaus, Richard, your clay mold method is exactly what we need. I appoint you both as chief craftsmen of the Solan Foundry. You will have a dedicated facility, ample labor, and priority access to all materials. Your task is to produce functional cannons as quickly as possible. If your work is quality, you will be well paid, and your families will be brought to Frostgard and cared for. Klaus and Richard were stunned, feeling as if they had been lifted from hell to heaven. The two captives trembled, kowtowing until their foreheads bled, repeatedly thanking the great leader and swearing to serve him to the death. Harold nodded in satisfaction and waved for them to prepare. He turned to Asgir, emphasizing that cannon casting was vital to their future military strength and required Asgir's personal supervision. Select reliable men to assist, ensure the process runs smoothly, prevent technology leaks, and report any progress or issues to me. Consider it done, brother, Asgir replied, eager to prove his worth. Watching Asgir leave, Harold felt his vision for the future sharpen. Possessing even primitive cannons was a crucial step into a new era for the Solan army, and entrusting this to his most trusted brother gave him peace of mind. Perhaps the path to Solonian power would begin with these crude mud molds and molten iron. Though the start was humble, they had finally taken the first difficult step. Meanwhile, in the south, I was also obsessively focused on cannons to bolster my territory's military might. I knew the 6-pounder bronze cannon gifted by Count Rochefort had been decisive in the recent siege. I desperately wanted to replicate it, but reality was harsh. Conford lacked the heavy industrial base, blast furnaces, heavy forging equipment, and expert engineers required to replicate such complex bronze cannons. Forcing the issue would only waste precious resources. The Count had seemingly forgotten to reclaim the 6-pounder, leaving it in Conford. I played dumb, treating it as a treasure while shifting my focus to more pragmatic, achievable designs. I recalled 3 famous Ming Dynasty cannons, the Hu Dun Pao, the Frankish cannon, and the Red Barbarian cannon. Since the Red Barbarian cannon, 6-pounder, was beyond my reach, I chose to trial the Hu Dun Pao and the Frankish cannon. The Hu Dun Pao was simple, a short, thick tube easily mass-produced by any blacksmith. Weighing under 50 pounds, it was highly mobile and could be carried by 2 soldiers. It was devastating against infantry clusters using canister shot, though its effective range was limited to under 50 meters. The Frankish cannon was more complex, featuring a barrel, mother gun, and a breech-loading chamber, child gun, inserted into a rectangular slot. Each cannon used 5 to 10 preloaded chambers, allowing for rapid swapping during combat. Its high rate of fire was its greatest advantage, and because the chamber was separate, the barrel faced less heat and pressure, reducing explosion risks. However, gas leakage at the breech reduced muzzle velocity, range, and penetration compared to traditional muzzle loaders. It also suffered from poor long-range accuracy and high manufacturing costs. I concluded that for Conford's current needs, these 2 types were the optimal choice. I envisioned the Hu Dun Pao as battalion-level support for infantry suppression and defensive density. The Frankish cannon would serve as regimental-level support for breaking formations and destroying fortifications. With this plan, I visited Hector's firearms workshop by the river. The workshop had been moved from the castle to the plains, placed under direct military control rather than the Ministry of Commerce. Its location near the river was chosen to accommodate future water-powered forging equipment. The workshop was a hive of activity. Roaring furnaces dispelled the spring chill, while the sounds of hammering, bellows, and shouting filled the air. It was no longer a makeshift shed. It had evolved significantly. With funding and planning by the engineer Mall, it was now a structured complex of stone and wood buildings connected by covered corridors. Inside, I implemented my concepts of standardization and division of labor, dividing the facility into specialized workshops. The barrel forging workshop was the largest and best ventilated, with furnaces burning year-round. Strong smiths and apprentices worked under masters to forge red-hot wrought iron bars around mandrels. Their work was critical for ensuring barrel straightness, uniform thickness, and pressure resistance. Apprentices focused on specific tasks, from operating bellows to welding and drilling, ensuring high efficiency. The mechanism workshop was quieter and more precise, responsible for the heart of the flintlock: triggers, hammers, springs, and sears. Craftsmen used delicate tools like files, drills, and calipers. Apprentices here needed patience and steady hands to shape springs and drill precise holes in tiny parts. Any flaw could render a weapon useless. The final assembly workshop was clean and orderly. Here, finished parts, barrels, mechanisms, stocks, and sights were assembled, adjusted, and tested. Craftsmen treated the guns like precision instruments, testing trigger pull, flint strike, and spring tension before dry firing. Apprentices learned assembly, troubleshooting, and quality control. Strict rules prevented apprentices from wandering between workshops. Only dedicated material handlers moved semi-finished parts between workshops, maintaining the production chain. Hector moved between stations, inspecting parts and providing hands-on guidance. I didn't interrupt for long. I called Hector outside to a quiet area. Hector wiped his sweat and asked respectfully, "My lord, do you have new instructions?" I cut straight to the point. "Hector, how are the 3 drilling machines performing? Has production efficiency improved?" Hector smiled brightly, noting that the new machines had doubled the speed of barrel drilling, resulting in straighter, smoother bores and higher yields. He reported that flintlock musket production had stabilized at 200 units per month, with significantly improved quality. I praised him but shifted the focus. I wanted to design a new type of cannon better suited to our current manufacturing capabilities. Hector became attentive, signaling his readiness to listen. I described my concept for a Frankish cannon, characterized by a breech-loading design. I explained the structure: a lightweight barrel with an open rear, paired with multiple preloaded chambers. I detailed the tactical advantage. A chamber is inserted and locked into the barrel for firing. Once spent, it is swapped for a fresh one, allowing for rapid follow-up shots. This design offers a much higher rate of fire than traditional muzzle loaders, making it ideal for defensive suppression or field combat. I suggested using clay mold casting for the compact, lightweight design. Hector, however, looked thoughtful rather than excited. He interrupted, noting the design sounded identical to the falconet used by the Plantagenet kingdom. I was slightly surprised by the name. Hector confirmed that the kingdom's falconets were light, breech-loading wrought iron cannons used by infantry for support, sharing the exact principles I described. I was initially surprised but quickly realized the logic. Given the era, it was natural for the Plantagenet kingdom to have developed similar technology. I had simply rediscovered an existing path, which saved me from explaining the concept. I asked if they could replicate or cast such a cannon with their current resources. Hector hesitated, then apologetically shook his head, stating it was currently impossible. He explained that the technical hurdle was the precision machining and gas sealing required at the junction of the chamber and barrel. Poor sealing would lead to power loss and danger to the crew, requiring high-level metalwork and casting precision. Hector admitted he had only seen falconets from afar in the royal capital and lacked the secret knowledge of the master smiths. He warned that attempting to replicate it with their current skill level risked failure or even a barrel explosion. I felt a wave of disappointment. Just as I prepared to discuss the minion cannon instead, a young worker named Elmont interjected, claiming he knew how to build it. Hector and I turned to look at him. A young, soot-covered worker stood nearby, holding a heavy mold part with an eager expression. I estimated the man was no older than 25. I found it hard to believe such a young man could master a craft that baffled Hector. Hector scolded Elmont, calling it a crime to lie to the Lord about his experience. Elmont insisted he was telling the truth. He explained he had spent years as a sailor on a long-distance merchant fleet before coming to Confort. He told me that such breech-loading cannons were common on armed merchant ships to fend off pirates. He added that he had frequently maintained, disassembled, and reassembled these cannons while assisting the ship's gunner. He claimed he had even observed local craftsmen casting and assembling them at a foreign port and had memorized the process. Hector remained skeptical, asking if Elmont had ever independently cast and assembled a complete cannon. Elmont admitted he hadn't, but insisted he understood the principles and was confident he could succeed. Hector retorted that cannon making wasn't a game and warned of the cost of wasted materials. He emphasized the danger of a barrel explosion to their own soldiers. Elmont turned pale but stood firm, offering to stand in front of the cannon during its first test fire to prove his confidence with his own life. The room fell silent. Hector sighed and looked to me for the final decision. I observed the young man, sensing his sincerity. I asked why a sailor with such experience would come to the war-torn Northern Territory. Elmont looked embarrassed and lowered his voice. He hesitated to elaborate. I immediately deduced that the merchant fleet was likely a pirate crew. This explained his familiarity with military-grade weaponry. Pirates often maintained superior artillery to survive. This background actually increased my trust in Elmont. Only the most skilled survived in that line of work. After a few seconds, I made my choice. I told Elmont I believed in his ability and resolve. I ordered Hector to allocate the necessary resources and establish a Falconet trial group under Elmont's technical guidance. I promoted Elmont to a level 3 craftsman, tasking him with developing the Falconet. I emphasized that the weapon must be reliable and safe, demanding precision over haste. I promised Elmont a substantial reward and the title of Workshop Master of Artillery if the Falconet passed rigorous testing. Overwhelmed, Elmont knelt and pledged his absolute loyalty and dedication to the Lord's mission. Hector expressed concern about entrusting strategic resources to an unproven newcomer, urging me to reconsider. I dismissed the worry, noting that while the raw materials were affordable, losing a talented individual would be a far greater loss. I ordered Elmont to maintain strict secrecy, directing Edgar to provide a secluded workshop for the project. Elmont confirmed he had no family in Confort, making him a solitary worker. I instructed Elmont to live within the new workshop, with provisions delivered to him to maintain isolation. I reiterated that the project was top secret. Even future assistance would be vetted by Edgar. Elmont accepted the trust, bowed, and left to gather his tools. I turned my focus back to Hector. I prioritized the Who-Done POW, which offered immediate, mass-producible combat utility compared to the long-term Falconet project. I detailed my vision for the Who-Done POW, its dimensions, weight, the use of clay mold casting, and its tactical role. Hector analyzed the concept, a 50-gene, portable short-barreled cannon designed to fire canister shot at charging infantry. Hector stroked his beard, deep in thought. I waited patiently for the expert's professional assessment. I knew the design had to be grounded in practical craftsmanship. Hector's expression shifted from concern to sudden realization. Excited, Hector noted the design closely resembled a weapon he had seen in the military. He identified it as a minion cannon, also known as a light field or infantry support gun. I was intrigued by the name. It was a mature, existing technology one hadn't encountered before. Hector explained the details to the young lord. The minion cannon was a small, muzzle-loading smoothbore gun cast using the clay mold method. The process involved creating a clay core and shell, pouring molten iron, and finishing the rough casting through grinding and drilling. Hector emphasized the need for structural strength to withstand explosions and a smooth bore to ensure accuracy. Unlike the Falconet or 6-pounder, the minion cannon was simpler, lacking complex breech-loading mechanisms. Hector noted that their workshop already possessed the skills required for its production. I realized I had been limiting my perspective by focusing solely on Ming Dynasty designs. I had been trapped in a cognitive bias. Ming artillery technology was heavily influenced by European advancements. The Ming system was essentially a synthesis of absorbed European techniques. I mocked myself for seeking advice from an apprentice while ignoring the masters nearby. The era was one of rapid European firearms evolution. Scientific progress and constant warfare had birthed a diverse family of specialized artillery. Beyond the minion, there were various types like falconets, culverins, and sakers. These weapons were part of a mature, battle-tested system of design, logistics, and training. These European paths were likely more advanced and better suited for standardized, large-scale field production. They were perfectly aligned with the linear tactics and field battles needed to combat the Solonians. Hector noted the minion's 30 mm caliber and 1 meter length, which balanced velocity and portability. Its primary role was firing canister shot to shatter infantry charges. It could also fire solid shot against fortifications or cavalry, though with less precision. Hector then challenged my 50 gene weight estimate, noting that a standard minion weighed 250 to 300 gene. With a carriage and wheels, the total weight would exceed 300 gene. I pondered the 300 gene figure. It was 6 times heavier than my vision, fundamentally changing its tactical application. My original Who Dun Pow concept prioritized extreme mobility. A single soldier could carry it for surprise attacks and rapid repositioning. However, the trade-off for such lightness was reduced range and power, effectively turning it into a giant musket for tactical ambushes. Hector's 300 gene minion cannon requires a specialized carriage and a crew of 3 or 4, or can be towed by pack animals. While less mobile than the Who Dun Pow, its heavier frame allows for larger powder charges and longer barrels, providing superior range, canister shot coverage, and destructive power. It functions effectively as a light field gun capable of accompanying infantry and providing immediate fire support. Carl quickly re-evaluated the weapon against the realities of the northern frontier. The north consists mainly of open plains and river valleys, where large-scale field battles and sieges are the norm, rather than complex mountain warfare. Carl needs a weapon to provide reliable, close-range support for infantry squares against Solonian charges or to bombard enemy fortifications. In this terrain, the extreme portability of the Who Dun Pow is less valuable than its lack of raw power. The resources required for one Who Dun Pow could likely produce more powerful weaponry. Carl realized he possesses a massive, overlooked advantage: horses. Conford now holds over 1,000 horses, donkeys, and mules. This logistical strength turns the 300 gene minion cannon from a burden into a viable asset, easily transported by a sturdy horse or a pair of donkeys. The minion cannon can keep pace with infantry and cavalry, offering sufficient tactical flexibility for the northern plains. Carl concluded that sacrificing extreme portability for greater firepower and range, while utilizing his surplus of horses, makes the minion cannon the superior choice for Conford. Carl asked Hector if he could successfully cast, machine, and assemble such a cannon with the workshop's current capabilities. Hector's eyes lit up with confidence. He stood tall and firmly guaranteed that he could handle the task. He noted that their expanded furnaces are fully capable of melting the iron required for a 300 gene barrel. Clay mold casting is a core skill for their craftsmen, honed through producing farm tools, bells, and musket barrels. Hector added that while challenging, the minion cannon falls within their technical reach, easier than a perfect musket barrel, but more complex than a simple axe. He promised a 90% success rate for a prototype within a month, provided materials and labor are available. Carl approved, but cautioned Hector to prioritize establishing a reliable, documented manufacturing process over mere speed. He emphasized the need for detailed records of every step and difficulty to ensure future mass production. Hector agreed, understanding that the first cannon is a vital test for building a foundation for future production. Carl patted Hector's shoulder, granting him full authority and support from Edgar. As Carl prepared to leave, he noticed a tidy young woman holding a wicker lunchbox, watching Hector with concern. Hector's stern expression softened, and he blushed slightly. He approached her, took the lunchbox, and exchanged a few quiet words before she stood aside. Curious, Carl asked who she was. Hector bashfully introduced her as Helena, a refugee from France City. He spoke softly, as if protecting her from past trauma. He explained she was a fallen noblewoman whose husband died shortly after their marriage. Her greedy brother seized her dowry and land, leaving her destitute. She fled to the northern frontier, suffering greatly along the way. Hector recalled finding her shivering and starving at the city gates. Moved by pity, he provided her with food and his mother's old clothes. She began helping him clean his messy cabin to show her gratitude. Hector admitted his life as a bachelor had been chaotic and cold. Helena transformed his home, organizing his tools and providing hot meals after his shifts. Hector smiled warmly, describing the newfound comfort and the scent of bread in his home. He expressed contentment with this simple, stable life. He no longer felt the need for wealth, only the comfort of companionship and a warm meal. Helena stepped forward, her movements revealing her noble upbringing. She curtsied and thanked Carl for his hospitality and for supporting Hector. Carl observed her. Despite her hardships, she retained an elegant, gentle demeanor. Carl found the situation amusing, noting that Hector, though appearing older, was not yet 40. As the workshop's lead master, Hector had trained over a dozen apprentices. With his salary and instruction fees, he earned dozens of silver coins monthly. Carl had previously worried Hector might be exploited by a widow, but he was relieved to see Hector's luck in finding Helena. Who would have thought Hector would be so lucky as to find a destitute noblewoman on his way home from work? Hector's kindness in providing for the destitute Helena was well known. A bachelor with few expenses, he now had a future with Helena, and perhaps children soon. I patted Hector's shoulder, encouraging him to choose the best house in Fort No. 1 and hold a proper wedding for the neighbors to witness. As a workshop foreman, you can afford a simple ceremony. It's a matter of respect and a proper commitment to Helena. Hector was stunned by the Lord's thoughtful concern for his personal life. Beaming, Hector agreed enthusiastically, promising to hold the wedding once his house in Fort No. 1 was complete. I promised to attend, nodded to Helena, and left the workshop in high spirits. Once alone, Hector and Helena sat by a sunny stack of timber. Helena opened their lunch, black bread, salted meat, and steaming vegetable soup. She whispered that they should save money and skip a grand wedding. Hector sipped the soup, feeling warmth spread through him. He looked at her with unwavering resolve. Taking her cold hands in his, he insisted, "No, you were a lady of good upbringing. You deserve better than this rough life. I won't cut corners on our wedding." He lamented that she had to endure a simple life with him, making the wedding non-negotiable. Moved by his sincerity, Helena teared up and smiled, finally agreeing. In the volatile northern frontier, finding such a man was a rare blessing. As spring deepened, construction on Fort No. 1 neared completion. Under Engineer Mall's direction, all functional buildings were finished. A cross-shaped main road divided the fort into military, residential, and work zones. The defensive stone wall, the fort's lifeline, was already being laid. Though not yet closed, its form promised future security. The residential zone in the southeast was the first to be finished. While less refined than future plans, these homes were a vast improvement over the shanties. With stone foundations and sturdy walls, the homes brought hope to the wounded veterans and serfs. Civil workshops were moved into the fort, separate from the military ones by the river. Woodworking, weaving, leather, and smithing shops opened for business. These provided vital jobs for women and recovering soldiers, filling the fort with productive life. Merchants followed quickly. Having secured prime locations near the crossroads through Edgar, they were ready to capitalize on the new population. This central area was the most valuable real estate in the fort. As residents moved in, the shops opened with impressive speed. Beyond grain and salt, merchants boldly opened 3 taverns and 2 restaurants. This was a gamble, as the residents were former military households accustomed to poverty. Yet, the merchants were confident in their purchasing power. The residents had recently received significant pensions and subsidies from the Lord, making them the wealthiest group in Confort. Opening day was a massive success, with crowds swarming the shops. Discounts and fresh goods drew eager customers, creating a lively atmosphere. Residents excitedly shopped for items they had never seen before. The taverns and restaurants were packed. Soldiers and families spent their coins on ale and hot meals, enjoying a rare luxury. They found comfort and satisfaction in the warmth of the taverns after years of hardship. Hector and Helena walked the streets, enjoying the sights. Helena checked grain prices, while Hector insisted on buying bright fabric for her wedding dress. Though prices were higher than the shanty markets, the quality and comfort made it worth the cost. Meanwhile, Edgar and Moll finished refurbishing the reception route and the castle. Following my cost-effective and dignified mandate, they avoided major construction. They reinforced fences along the main road with timber and decorated them with cloth from Lady Irene's supplies to hide the shanties. Dilapidated shacks were patched up to look presentable from the road. The castle was cleaned and repaired, removing the scars of war. It wasn't opulent, but it was sturdy and dignified enough for a lord's residence. The project cost only 300 gold coins, a negligible sum that achieved the desired political effect, earning my praise. I stood on the shores of Amber Bay. Before me lay a vast ruin, the charred remains of a once prosperous city. Amber Bay lacked a proper pier, offering only natural beaches and reefs. Two weathered, patched-up sailboats were laboriously approaching the shore. Without a jetty, docking was complex. Local fishermen rowed out in small boats, tossed heavy ropes to the larger vessels, and secured them to the masts. Once the anchors were raised, the small boats towed the sailboats toward the shallows like human tugs. Near the shore, the crew used long bamboo poles to fend off reefs, finally grounding the ships with immense effort. A leader stepped off and saluted me. "My lord, we have returned from France City, and the trade is complete." I inspected the goods, confirming their origin, and nodded with a satisfied smile. These ships, salvaged from Amber Bay's ruins, had been painstakingly repaired over months for coastal navigation. This 100-kilometer voyage to France City was a significant milestone. It proved Amber Bay's strategic value, sitting across from the field territory, which bordered my home, the Franklin territory. I envisioned a future for the desolate bay. Rebuilding it into a deep-water port would grant Confort a cheap maritime trade route to the prosperous south. Goods could be shipped directly to France City or the field territory. Crucially, this would bridge Confort to the Schmidt family headquarters, streamlining logistics and communication. I summoned the engineer, Moll, to explain my vision. Moll immediately grasped the strategic importance of the bay. "Your vision is far-sighted, my lord. A port is vital for Confort's growth." Moll cautioned that permanent stone piers required immense time and capital. "I suggest a transitional solution, building barges to serve as temporary floating piers." I, unfamiliar with the term, frowned. Moll explained, "A barge is a large, flat-bottomed vessel that stays anchored to act as a floating dock." He gestured, describing how they could be built from sturdy timber and connected to the shore via gangplanks. Ships can dock alongside the barge, making loading safer and far more efficient than our current manual methods. My eyes lit up. It was a perfect, economical, and immediate solution. "Excellent. Proceed with building these barges immediately." Moll hesitated. "I understand the principle, but constructing seaworthy barges requires professional shipwrights, which is outside my expertise." I was not discouraged. I felt confident in my growing administrative capabilities. "We have established recruitment mechanisms. This is the perfect test for them. Moll, issue a notice through the Lord's Manor and the Ministry of Livelihood to register any local fishermen with ship repair experience. Also, post recruitment notices in France City and nearby towns to hire experienced shipwrights, especially those skilled in port infrastructure." "Yes, my lord," Moll replied confidently. He knew Confort's rising reputation and competitive pay would attract talent. I looked at the bay with anticipation. Standing in the salty breeze, I felt a rare sense of relief from my recent stresses. My blueprint for the maritime route felt clearer than ever. However, as I returned to Carnford Castle, the practical satisfaction was replaced by a sense of superficiality. I frowned upon entering the castle. The interior had been transformed from a stark, military fortress into something unfamiliar. Sunlight streamed through new, clear glass windows. Lady Irene was directing servants in final preparations. The stone walls were draped in tapestries bearing the Schmidt and Plantagenet crests. The tables were set with fine linens, silver candelabras, and gilded cutlery, with rare southern plants placed in the corners. The hall felt warm and ornate, yet it clashed with my vision of a Northern War Command Center. Seeing my mother's joy, I swallowed my complaints. I understood this was about the Schmidt family's honor and respect for the royal family. Lady Irene turned, saw me, and beamed. "Carl, you're just in time." She led me to the back of the hall. A raised, ornate wooden platform had been constructed where the Lord's chair once stood. Behind it hung a massive joint crest banner, with 2 velvet-covered chairs in front, surrounded by flowers. It looked like a wedding altar. "Look, Carl," Irene said, trembling with excitement. "This is where you and Princess Louise will hold your wedding ceremony before all the guests." She seemed to be reliving the future moment. She turned to me, mimicking a priest. "Carl von Schmidt, do you take Louise von Heinrich as your wife, to love and cherish until the end of your days?" Lady Irene encouraged me to rehearse my wedding vows, explaining that after I say, "I do," the priest will prompt the princess to do the same. Then, you exchange rings, and before God and all witnesses, you shall be blessed as husband and wife. Seeing his mother's pure, girlish excitement for my future, I felt a complex mix of emotions. I could neither explain the cold political reality behind this marriage nor bear to shatter her beautiful dream. Forcing a gentle smile, I took her hand and said, "Mother, I know what to do. Thank you for all your effort." My gratitude was sincere, both for her love and for the temporary illusion of normalcy she provided. Touched, Lady Irene squeezed my hand, her eyes misting over with joy at seeing her son reach this milestone. I watched her smile, my own heart heavy with silence. To me, this elaborate wedding was merely a grand ceremony of duty and compromise. The vow of "I do" would carry a weight far beyond its literal meaning. As Lady Irene began discussing seating charts and attire, Brendan's urgent, steady footsteps interrupted the festive atmosphere. Brendan approached, his expression grave, and whispered, "My lord, urgent news. We've captured a suspicious individual at the outer checkpoint, likely a Solon spy. Richter is currently interrogating him in the dungeon." My relaxed demeanor vanished instantly. I had underestimated the Solonians. They were far more cunning than mere barbarians. I offered my mother an apologetic look. "Mother, forgive me. I have urgent military business." Understanding the weight of his duties, she nodded. "Go. We can discuss the wedding later." I left the hall with Brendan, leaving the wedding preparations behind. Once in the corridor, I asked, "What happened? How was he discovered?" Brendan reported. At checkpoint 3, a man claiming to be a refugee from the Black Forest Valley said his home was burned by Solonians. The guard grew suspicious when the man hesitated and gave contradictory answers regarding local geography and the local lord's family. For instance, he misidentified the Whitestone Creek as Blackwater Creek. He also failed to describe the heraldry or the castle architecture correctly. Furthermore, his accent betrayed Solonian roots despite his attempt to mimic the northern frontier dialect. The guard detained him, and under Richter's interrogation, the man confessed to being a Solonian spy sent to infiltrate Conford and sow chaos. I felt a mix of dread and relief. I was alarmed by the reach of Solonian espionage, but relieved by the vigilance of my guards. That guard was sharp. "Who was it?" Brendan smiled. "It was Franz, the veteran Tommy recommended. This was his first independent shift." Franz again. I was impressed. I remembered Tommy's praise for the man's scouting abilities. His counterintelligence instincts were equally keen. I had clearly discovered a rare talent worth cultivating. They arrived at the dungeon. The facility remained unchanged, dark and foreboding. Guarded by 2 soldiers, the heavy iron door opened to reveal the scent of blood and despair. Torches flickered against the stone walls, casting long, eerie shadows. They reached the interrogation room, where I found a surprising sight. The spy was tied to an iron chair, his clothes intact, showing no signs of external physical trauma. Yet, the reality was clear upon closer inspection. The man was pale, drenched in cold sweat, and trembling with terror as he stared at the stoic Richter. I noticed the spy's fingertips were mangled, covered in needle pricks and bruising, the result of Richter's precise, non-lethal torture. Richter's methods were as efficient as ever. Richter saluted. "My lord, Commander Brendan." I returned the salute. "What has he confessed?" Richter reported. "He is a northern hunter from Black Forest Castle, captured after the Solonians razed his home. The Solonians took his wife and children hostage, forcing him to infiltrate Conford to gather intelligence on our defenses and supplies. Who gave the order? I asked. A Plantagenet defector named Leon, Richter replied. He explained that Leon was a former commander of Old Osric Castle who surrendered to the Solonians years ago when reinforcements failed to arrive. Harold, the Solonian leader, had spared Leon and utilized his knowledge of the northern frontier's defense systems. Leon had since risen to a high position within the Solonian military, trusted by Harold himself. Are there accomplices? Brendan asked. Richter nodded. 7 in total, including him, all infiltrating via different routes. He doesn't know the others' identities. They operate on single-line communication with no fixed base, tasked to gather intel and escape within 3 months. If they fail, his family will be executed. Silence filled the dungeon, the air heavy with the cruelty of the threat. Using family as leverage to force others into betrayal is both sinister and pathetic. I looked at the spy's desperate face, feeling no triumph, only a complex unease. This was a grim glimpse of war, signaling that Conford would face more shadow-based threats. I needed to tighten internal security and counter-espionage immediately. Emerging from the damp, hopeless dungeon into the sunlight, I felt my tension ease slightly. I headed for the Lord's Hall, but seeing servants decorating for my wedding, a jarring contrast to the dungeon, I stopped. I turned toward a small, quiet document room, signaling Richter and Brendan to follow. Inside, I shut the door, my expression hardening. You heard it yourselves, I said. At least 7 Solonian spies have infiltrated our territory via the refugees. We cannot remain passive. We must hunt these vermin down. I looked at Richter. I am establishing a new intelligence department. Richter, you will lead it. Richter's eyes lit up with disbelief and hunger. He had long felt lost among his peers. I was a tactical genius, Brendan was a steady commander, and Roland was a powerful Tier 2 knight. Even Leon had found his niche in cavalry command. Richter alone had lacked a stage to call his own. This was not just trust. It was the opportunity he had craved. His past experience with Solonian infiltrators at France City finally had a purpose. He trembled with excitement. I defined the mandate. First, counterespionage. Build a network of eyes and ears to root out spies. Second, foreign intelligence. We must stop waiting for attacks. For now, focus on sharpening the counterespionage blade. Report directly to me. Yes, my lord, Richter replied, his voice hoarse with resolve. I will be your hidden blade. Good, I said. I grant you the authority to secretly recruit from our refugees, soldiers, and staff. Quality over quantity. Start with 10 core members. I want elite operators, not bureaucrats. Richter immediately requested Franz, the sentry who had caught the spy. I was impressed by Richter's decisiveness. I turned to Brendan. How is the main Legion recruitment? Progress is excellent, Brendan reported. 900 recruits are trained, and we expect to hit our 2,000-man target easily. Then we can spare Franz for the intelligence department, right? I asked. My tone implied the decision was already made. Brendan agreed, though he added a caveat. Richter, don't poach all my best men. We need elites for the front lines too. Richter promised to limit his poaching to Franz. I noted that Tommy had recommended Franz, proving Tommy had a good eye for talent. However, I added, intelligence work is life or death. I want to vet him personally. Bring him tomorrow. Richter agreed. I reconsidered. Actually, wait until after my wedding. The meeting concluded, and they departed. I remained alone in the small room. The distant noise of wedding preparations highlighted the silence inside. The spy's face, the threat of Leon, and Harold's sophisticated use of espionage flooded my mind. It was absurd and heavy. Harold, a barbarian, was outmaneuvering them in shadow warfare. The Plantagenet kingdom's bureaucrats, who prided themselves on political cunning, were failing both on the battlefield and in the shadows. This contrast solidified my resolve to build an efficient, loyal intelligence network. I could not rely on the sluggish, bloated machinery of the kingdom. I remained focused, knowing this new department required delicate handling. Internal coordination was vital. I must speak with Edgar, I thought. As steward, Edgar managed logistics, cover identities, and funding, all essential for intelligence operations. Intelligence must be invisible, blending into the populace. Agents could be merchants, craftsmen, or servants. Edgar's expertise was required to weave these covers. I paced, reflecting on my choice of Richter. Richter's talent was clear, but there was more to it. I reviewed my core team. Brendan, Roland, and Edgar were all tied to my roots in the Franklin territory, ensuring my absolute trust. They formed the core of the Conford power structure, the Schmidt faction and the Franklin faction. Leon, despite his martial prowess and cavalry command, hails from the France City system and remains an outsider to the established inner circle. Richter, also from France City, is a former junior officer. Lacking deep connections or a power base, he is essentially a lone official in Conford's current hierarchy. This lack of factional ties is exactly what I value most. My long-term vision for the intelligence department extends far beyond mere espionage. A mature intelligence system must also handle internal oversight, monitoring officials to prevent corruption, dereliction of duty, and betrayal, ensuring the Lord's will is absolute. This sensitive role requires absolute loyalty and must remain detached from bureaucratic factions to maintain its deterrent power. While Conford is currently too small for such measures, I must prepare for the future. Absolute power leads to absolute corruption. As the territory expands, the risk of internal rot or ambitious opportunists grows. An independent, efficient internal oversight body reporting directly to me will be essential for maintaining order. Richter, with his talent, simple background, and distance from existing cliques, is the perfect candidate to wield this double-edged sword. I will keep this deeper intent hidden for now, even from Richter. For the present, the intelligence department's focus remains purely on external defense. With my thoughts organized, I head out to find Edgar to discuss the department's formation and Richter's reassignment. Every move must lay the foundation for Conford's stable future. Passing the Lord's Hall, I glance inside. Lady Irene is busy directing servants in decorating with drapes and silver, creating a festive atmosphere that clashes with the castle's military tone. I quickly slip past. I avoid being caught and dragged into wedding planning. Realizing Edgar would be busy, I head toward the plains. Servants confirm Edgar is overseeing land distribution, a task consuming his time for days. Edgar has been working tirelessly to select administrative talent. He and Maul designed a practical test covering math, geometry, and physics, to which I added management and situational questions. This two-stage selection process screens refugees for potential, literacy, and logic. Thanks to this, the Ministry of Organization has gained many capable new recruits. These fresh officials have significantly eased the administrative burden. However, they lack experience, requiring Edgar's constant guidance, which keeps him perpetually busy. I'll find him on the plains, I decide, wanting to see the progress myself. Riding out to the Conford Plains, I am invigorated by the sight. The barren land is now marked into orderly, grid-like plots. Refugees gather around numbered stakes, their faces filled with hope, a stark contrast to their former despair. I find Edgar in the crowd, intently explaining boundary lines to refugees and new officials using a large map. Despite the chill, Edgar is sweating, yet his tone remains patient and focused. Families who have received their plots are already building homes. They are constructing simple shacks from wood and thatch. Though crude, the refugees were expressions of profound satisfaction. I understand. A shack on one's own land is worth more than a rental in a shanty town. The sense of ownership and security provided by their own land is irreplaceable. They are eager to root themselves in their new homes. I watch quietly from my horse. Edgar continues his patient work, explaining boundaries and coordinating with his subordinates without a hint of irritation. Once the current section is settled, Edgar finally sits on the damp earth to rest. I approach. Edgar tries to rise, but I stop him, saying, "Rest, Edgar, you've earned it." I sit beside him on the ridge, both looking out over the hopeful scene. "How is the distribution going?" I ask. Edgar wipes his brow, smiling wearily. "Very well, my lord. The first batch for veteran subjects and soldiers' families is done. We are nearly halfway through the refugees." He points outward. As you can see, refugees are settled on the outer perimeter. Maul and I reserve the fertile inner land near Water and Tunbayo for future expansion and strategic defense. I nod in approval. Well considered. Fairness must be balanced with strategy. Edgar adds, to protect the outer settlements from Solonian light cavalry, Maul has planned a series of small defensive structures. These field forts, small stone and rammed earth structures, will house small squads of musketeers and archers, scattered like nails across the fields. If Solonians raid, farmers can retreat into these forts, and the garrison can hold them off, preventing deep incursions. We are also building beacon towers for early warning. An excellent idea, I exclaim, impressed by Maul's design. This beacon and field fort model will greatly enhance border survival. I turned serious, telling Edgar I had an urgent matter to discuss. I revealed that Leon had sent at least 7 spies into Conford, and that I was establishing an intelligence department under Richter to handle counterespionage. Edgar was shocked and worried, realizing the Solonians had infiltrated their territory so deeply. The prospect of such a massive security breach weighed heavily on the steward. I comforted him, explaining that while the hidden enemy was dangerous, the new department would allow them to establish effective defenses. I requested Edgar's full support, noting that intelligence agents would need cover identities across various departments. I added that Edgar's office must secretly handle their funding and logistics while maintaining strict confidentiality. Edgar immediately grasped the gravity of his new responsibility. He vowed to fully cooperate with Richter, emphasizing that internal security was a matter of survival. I thanked him and promised that Richter would coordinate the details later, urging Edgar to rest. I felt relieved watching Edgar return to work. With the steward's support, the intelligence department's logistics were secured. After checking on irrigation progress with Maul's craftsmen, I returned to the castle at sunset. Golden light bathed the castle walls as I arrived. As I dismounted, I spotted a rider arriving at the gate. The messenger wore dusty France City leather armor and looked exhausted from his journey. The rider locked eyes with me immediately. The messenger knelt, presenting a sealed letter bearing the Count Rochefort crest. By order of the Count, Princess Louise's procession arrived safely in France City yesterday morning. The announcement echoed through the courtyard, drawing the attention of the staff. I remained outwardly calm despite my racing heart. I took the heavy letter, feeling the texture of the wax seal. I thanked the messenger with a steady, neutral tone. Tell the Count that Conford will be ready, I added. The messenger reported that the princess would rest in France City to recover from the journey. The exact date for the northward departure was pending, and the messenger departed to return to the Count. I dismissed him. The messenger rode out into the twilight. I stood still, clutching the letter. I looked toward the horizon, contrasting the bustling capital with my own rugged mountains. It is finally happening, I thought, feeling a mix of heavy responsibility and exhaustion rather than joy. I entered the castle, where my mother, Lady Irene, had dinner waiting. During the meal, I shared the news of the princess's arrival. I informed her that the procession would likely head north in 2 or 3 days. Lady Irene was overcome with excitement and relief. She immediately began planning, insisting that I focus entirely on wedding preparations and etiquette. I agreed to her demands, knowing it was her wish. I felt I owed it to her to play my part. However, his mother sensed my true feelings. She noticed the subtle detachment behind my calm mask. Her excitement faded as she gently placed her hand over mine, asking if I was truly unhappy about the arranged marriage. I hesitated, then looked down, unable to deny it. My silence confirmed her suspicions. Lady Irene acknowledged that such political unions were vastly different from love matches. She empathized with my reluctance and uncertainty. She encouraged me, trusting in my character and the princess's upbringing. She expressed hope that they could build a bond through mutual sincerity. She promised that marriage would eventually bring me comfort and companionship. I felt conflicted by her hopeful words. I could not reveal the cold political reality or my feelings for Charlotte. I forced a smile and squeezed her hand, promising to try. Meanwhile, construction on the road to Conford was in full swing. Count Rochefort's engineers and local citizens worked tirelessly. They cleared the soil, compacted the foundation, and shaped the road for drainage. They finished by layering large rocks, gravel, and sand to ensure durability. Stonemasons laid square blue stones to create a sturdy, durable road. Drainage ditches were dug, and engineers built simple stone and wood outposts for messengers and patrols. The site buzzed with the rhythmic sounds of construction. Suddenly, an officer blew a copper whistle. "Stop work. Move aside. Kneel." Silence fell instantly. Workers and citizens turned to see a grand, massive ceremonial procession approaching along the new road. They knelt on one knee, heads bowed, avoiding eye contact. The site became deathly quiet, save for the wind. Leading the procession were over 100 royal knights in polished breastplates and plumed helmets. Mounted on white horses, they carried lances adorned with swallow-tailed pennants bearing the Plantagenet golden bird crest. The knights displayed impeccable discipline and stern authority. Behind them were royal musicians, their gilded horns and ornate drums signaling royal status. Next came the core carriages. A dozen lavishly decorated carriages followed, featuring intricate carvings, gold fittings, and silk curtains. The central carriage, pulled by 8 white horses, resembled a mobile, opulent palace. Guards, servants, and wagons laden with dowries and royal gifts trailed behind. The procession stretched for hundreds of meters. Commoners knelt in awe, stealing glances at the spectacle, imagining the distant royal life. Inside the central carriage, Princess Louise peered through a tiny gap in the curtains. She watched the kneeling commoners and caught their curious, fearful gazes. She closed the curtain, shutting out the world. The dim, incense-filled cabin felt suffocating. Albert, the steward sent by Queen Mother Katerina, spoke coldly from outside. "Your Highness, do not move the curtains. It damages royal dignity." Louise curled up on the velvet seat in silence. The long, bumpy journey left her dizzy and nauseated. She was unaccustomed to such travel. The carriage hit a rough patch as they left the paved road for the rugged terrain of Confort. Louise nearly fell, caught by her maid Alice, as nausea surged. Albert's emotionless voice returned. "We have left the paved road for the primitive paths of Confort. Please endure, we are almost there." Pale and trembling, Louise pleaded. "Mr. Albert, I feel terrible. Could we stop for a moment to let me breathe?" Albert refused coldly. "The schedule is tight. The Lord of Confort is waiting. Please persist." Louise closed her eyes, trembling. She realized that without her father's protection, she was nothing to these guardians from Eisenberg. Her feelings were irrelevant. Beyond physical sickness, she felt a profound, lonely despair. She remembered her late, gentle mother. If her mother were alive, she wouldn't be sent away like a gift to this desolate land. Tears streamed down her face. "Your Highness, please don't cry," Alice sobbed. Wiping the princess's tears, Alice whispered, "Take care of yourself. Maybe Lord Carl is a good man." Louise shook her head weakly. What expectations could she have for a stranger forced upon her by a decree? She was merely a boat adrift in a storm, heading toward an unknown fate. The carriage jolted endlessly along the rugged path. 2 days later, the morning air in the northern frontier was crisp and cold. Leon reported to me that the princess's procession had reached the valley entrance and would arrive within 2 hours. I took a breath and dressed. I wore a fur-lined leather jacket, a heavy brown bear fur coat, riding breeches, and knee-high leather boots. I looked more like a battle-hardened frontier officer than a noble groom. I never truly identified with my Viscount title. I insisted on being called Lord Carl rather than Viscount. Lady Irene straightened my collar, dusting me off. To her, I was always the most handsome and pride-worthy son. She patted my arm with encouragement and hidden worry. I led my core officials, Edgar, Maul, and Brendan, out of Carnford Castle. They proceeded through the shanty town, which had been tidied up for the occasion. Subjects stood behind soldier-guarded lines, silent and filled with a mix of awe and anxiety. We stopped at a cleared area on the edge of the shanty town to await the princess. Leon's local cavalry stood on the right. Their gear was worn, marked by battle and lacking polish. Yet, they stood tall, eyes sharp, radiating a lethal, battle-hardened aura. They stood like stone, silent proof of the blood shed to defend this land. On the left were Lady Irene's family knights from Franklin territory. They were polished, ornate, and well-equipped, showcasing the wealth of the southern duchy. The two groups, one like a raw blade, the other like a ceremonial sword, formed the honor guard. I kept Thorstein's brave but politically sensitive Solon defectors away to avoid royal suspicion. Time passed in silent anticipation. Finally, a golden royal banner appeared on the horizon, followed by a forest of flags. A magnificent, massive procession escorted by the royal knights flowed toward Carnford like a shimmering river. The vanguard consisted of royal ceremonial cavalry, their armor gleaming with stylized, rigid majesty. In the center were gilded carriages, their heavy silk curtains concealing the interior. The rear was occupied by a vast supply train carrying the princess's dowry and staff. The contrast between this peak Plantagenet display and the rugged, war-scarred Carnford was stark. The procession halted 20 paces from me and my officials. The sudden silence was absolute. Edgar the steward took a breath and shouted, "Kneel to welcome Her Highness the Princess." The command echoed across the field. I immediately stepped forward, knelt on my right knee, and bowed my head. Behind me, officials, soldiers, and subjects knelt like wheat in the wind. The cavalry bowed their heads and touched their chests. The crowd lowered itself in reverence to the crown. In the silence, the eyes of the royal knights and the Carnford cavalry locked. The royal elites, polished and arrogant, faced the battle-hardened veterans of the northern frontier, whose gazes were cold and steady. A silent, warrior-like tension filled the air. All eyes focused on the most ornate carriage. The heavy curtains remained closed. Lady Irene's maids approached the carriage with prearranged offerings. One held a silver cup of local mead. "Welcome to Carnford, Your Highness. May your future be as sweet as honey." The other offered fur-lined gloves. "The north is cold. May these keep your hands warm forever." The carriage door opened, and Alice, the princess's maid, stepped out, looking pale. With her help, Princess Louise finally emerged. She wore a formal royal travel gown of deep blue velvet with Plantagenet embroidery and a fur-trimmed cloak. Her face was deathly pale, her lips parched. Exhausted by the journey and motion sickness, she stumbled, relying on her maids for support. Louise tried to maintain her royal composure, nodding slightly to the crowd. Suddenly, overcome by nausea, she doubled over and gagged into her handkerchief. The sight shocked everyone. The royal retinue looked horrified and embarrassed. Albert, the steward, glared with cold fury, viewing the display as a disgrace to the crown. They conveniently ignored that their own grueling pace had caused her condition. As the Carnford officials stood frozen, Lady Irene acted, signaling a servant to run to the castle. Moments later, Irene returned with steaming ginger tea. "Your Highness, please drink this to warm your stomach." Louise drank gratefully with the maid's help. The warmth eased her nausea, and her color improved. She looked at Irene with an apologetic gaze. "My lady, forgive my rudeness." "Thank you." Irene smiled. "Do not worry, Your Highness. Your health comes first." Supported by her maid, Louise walked unsteadily toward the still kneeling me. She looked down at the rugged, simple young man, her future husband, the Lord of Carnford. She took a jeweled ceremonial dagger from a box held by her maid. This was the guardian sword, symbolizing the prince consort's duty to protect the princess. "Lord Karl von Schmidt," Louise said, her voice weak but steady. "By order of the king and queen mother, take this sword as a token. May we work in unity." I looked up, meeting her pale, weary eyes. I accepted the sword with both hands. "I, Karl von Schmidt, thank the king, the queen mother, and Your Highness. I shall protect you with my life." The awkward ceremony concluded. Lady Irene stepped in, taking the princess's arm. "Your Highness, you are exhausted. We have prepared a comfortable room in the castle for you to rest." Louise, dizzy and swaying, looked at Irene with relief. She nodded weakly. "Thank you, my lady." The plan for the princess to walk among the subjects was cancelled due to her condition. Assisted by Irene and her maids, Louise returned to her carriage. The procession moved toward Carnford Castle. I and my officials mounted our horses to lead the way. The royal retinue followed, observing their surroundings with caution. Albert, the stern royal steward, scanned the shanty town, which had been hastily tidied. He frowned, his gaze condescending. Seeing the roads cleared of debris and the shanties reinforced, his expression softened slightly. Given that Carnford had recently been a ruin, the young lord had done what he could. He had at least shown surface-level sincerity. In Albert's view, I had barely passed this first test. He remained focused on his secret orders: monitor the couple and evaluate the true state of Carnford. Inside the carriage, Louise peeked through the curtain, greedily breathing the air. Though it smelled of earth, smoke, and livestock, she felt a raw, vibrant life force absent from the royal gardens. This atmosphere of struggle and resilience brought her a sense of peace she had never known in the palace. The subjects kneeling along the road had been carefully selected by Edgar to present a respectable face of the territory. The refugees were kept at a distance, while the old subjects, who had followed me longer and were better fed, knelt closer to the road. Tommy's family was among them. Anna held her daughter Sarah's hand, all three bowing respectfully, awestruck by their first sight of royalty. Young Sarah, unable to suppress her curiosity, stole a glance at the magnificent, dreamlike carriage passing by. A pale, slender hand parted the curtains, and Sarah locked eyes with the exhausted but stunningly beautiful Princess Louise. Sarah was transfixed, thinking the princess looked like a fairy from a painting. She forgot all etiquette. Tommy noticed and, panicked, gently but firmly pushed his sister's head down, whispering, "Sarah, don't stare." Blushing, Sarah buried her head, whispering apologies, though the image of the beautiful princess remained etched in her mind. The carriage reached the gates of Carnford Castle. Lady Irene stepped forward to assist the weak Princess Louise, saying, "Your Highness, please come inside to rest." Louise nodded gratefully, and I followed them into the castle with my officials. The Lord's Hall felt different today. A roaring fire in the hearth chased away the northern chill. Expensive southern incense masked the scent of stone and smoke. Countless candles illuminated the hall. Thick carpets covered the floor, hiding the castle's wear. Lady Irene seated the princess in a cushioned armchair by the fire. The heat and strange incense made Louise feel ill. She covered her nose and frowned in discomfort. Lady Irene announced, "The princess is unwell. We will end today's proceedings and escort her to her room." Royal Steward Albert protested, "This is improper. Today is an auspicious date for the engagement ceremony. We cannot change plans due to minor discomfort." Edgar stepped in. "The princess is truly unwell. Forcing the ceremony would be a greater insult to royal dignity than a delay." Albert insisted, "We cannot delay. How will I answer to the Queen Mother?" The royal officials murmured in agreement, raising tensions. A calm, authoritative voice cut through the argument. I tapped my knuckles twice on the oak table. Silence fell as everyone turned to the young lord. I looked at Albert and then at the suffering princess, stating, "The princess is exhausted. We will postpone the ceremony until tomorrow. Her health is the priority." My tone left no room for negotiation. Albert tried to argue but faltered under my steady gaze and the silent, firm support of the Carnford officials. Realizing he was on my home turf, Albert bowed stiffly. "As you command, my lord." Louise leaned back, watching the man who had just defended her. He seemed cold and distant, likely acting only out of duty. Yet, when everyone else ignored her pain for the sake of protocol, he had given her a moment of relief. His cold exterior suddenly felt like a source of warmth. He was not just a heartless political symbol. Lady Irene escorted the princess to her bedroom. The tension in the hall shifted. The royal mission was far from over. I knew the delegation was here to monitor me. They were watching the princess, my loyalty, and the true state of Carnford. Albert approached, his expression strictly professional. "Since the princess is resting, we must inspect Carnford's facilities to better serve her. May we have a tour?" I knew this was a reconnaissance mission for the Queen Mother. I smiled understandingly. "Of course. Your comfort is our priority." I turned to Edgar. "Escort Steward Albert and his staff around the castle and the Tunbeo. Be thorough and honest." I emphasized honest, and Edgar understood. I added, "Richter, take some men to assist and ensure the tour goes smoothly." Richter stood straight. "Yes, my lord." He knew his job was to monitor the royal party's intentions. Albert, in particular, required close observation. Albert bowed, satisfied, "Thank you." Accompanied by Edgar and Richter, Albert began his inspection. The hall fell quiet, leaving only me and my attendants. My gaze fell on the long table, laden with the feast prepared for the wedding. Steaks, roasted game, rare fruits, and desserts filled the air with aroma. With the ceremony postponed, the feast lost its purpose. Such luxury was rare in frugal Carnford and would not keep until tomorrow. I told my remaining officials, the banquet is cancelled, but the food shouldn't go to waste. Eat what you like. The officials declined, preferring to return to their families, and bowed out. I didn't press them. I knew they were uncomfortable with such formality. Left alone with my attendants, I sat at the head of the table. I noticed a new, ornate high-backed chair placed beside my own at the dining table. It was reserved for the princess. The empty seat served as a silent reminder that I would no longer be dining alone. Unsettled by the prospect of company, I shook off my thoughts and picked up my cutlery. My daily meals were notoriously simple for a noble, focused solely on sustenance. My diet consisted of coarse black bread, stewed vegetables, butter, milk, and local shellfish or fish. The extravagant feast before me was entirely unfamiliar. Consider it an upgrade, I muttered to myself before eating. I ate slowly, savoring the rare flavors. The charred meat, fresh fish, and sweet fruit made for a truly indulgent meal. After eating, I looked at the untouched food and instructed my servants. Keep some for yourselves, then distribute the rest to the struggling serfs, especially families with children, the elderly, and the new refugees. I paused, then added calmly, distribute it in the name of the princess. The servants were delighted by the unexpected meal and hurried off to carry out my orders. I sat alone in the hall, tapping my fingers on the table. I couldn't explain why I had attributed the charity to the princess. Usually, a lord would claim such generosity to bolster his own reputation. Why give this prestige to a newcomer who hadn't even appeared in public yet? Perhaps it was pity for her situation, or a subconscious desire to help this political sacrifice build a foundation of goodwill in a strange land. I attributed it to a shared sense of resignation toward their fates. After all, as my wife, her reputation was now my own. After washing up, I changed into linen sleepwear and headed to my bedroom door. I knocked, and at my mother Anna's soft invitation, I entered. The room was warm, lit by a soft oil lamp and a crackling fireplace. Princess Louise lay in bed, pale and exhausted, breathing deeply in sleep. Anna sat by the bed, her hand held tightly by the sleeping princess. Alice and another maid stood quietly in the corner. Anna signaled for silence, whispering. She was utterly exhausted. She fell asleep the moment her head hit the pillow, still clutching my hand. I watched the princess for a moment. Without her daytime defenses, she looked fragile and childlike. The icy wall I had built against this political marriage softened. "Mother, stay here tonight to look after her," I whispered. I then turned to the maids. Alice bowed, insisting, "Lord Carl, we must remain by her side." I considered the limited space. "You two take the guest room across the hall. I'll sleep on a cot in the study." The maids were shocked, protesting that it was improper for the lord to give up his room. Anna intervened gently. "Since the lord is being considerate, accept it. The princess's rest is our priority." Her tone brooked no argument. The maids bowed gratefully. "Thank you, Lord Carl. Thank you, madam." The movement stirred Louise, and she slowly opened her eyes. She looked around, confused, before spotting Anna, me, and her maids. Realizing her situation, a flush of embarrassment colored her pale face. She let go of Anna's hand, trying to sit up. "Madam, I apologize. I fell asleep and held on to you." Anna pressed her back down gently. "Rest, Highness. You are weak. You need the sleep." Louise looked at me, her eyes filled with guilt. "Lord Carl, I am terribly sorry. My illness delayed the ceremony." Her voice trembled at the mention of the ceremony. Seeing her fear of displeasing me, my resentment toward the marriage dissipated. I offered a calm, gentle smile. "It doesn't matter. The wedding is just a formality. Your health comes first. There is no need for such rigid etiquette in Confort." Louise was stunned by my uncharacteristic warmth, and her tension eased. She offered a faint, tentative smile. "Thank you for your understanding." Suddenly, a loud growl emanated from the princess's stomach. Louise turned bright red, wishing she could hide under the covers. She had barely eaten during the journey and was now starving. Anna laughed softly. "You must be hungry. Alice, go prepare something light for her." I added, Tell Edgar to have the kitchen prepare warm porridge and light vegetables. Yes, my lord. Alice hurried out. She soon returned with a tray of steaming honey-scented oatmeal, blanched pea shoots, and soft white bread. The simple food stirred Louise's appetite. Anna stood up. Let us leave her to eat in peace. She signaled Alice to place the tray on the bedside table, earning a grateful look from Louise. Everyone exited, leaving the maids to guard the door. Anna and I walked to the small parlor on the second floor. Lady Irene smiled at her son. Carl, you've been critical of this marriage, but your conduct today was truly responsible and considerate. I laughed dryly. Don't praise me, mother. I simply couldn't stand Albert's group bullying her without regard for her life. I glanced at the princess's closed door, my voice dropping. She was forced here to this frozen land and is unwell. She is a pitiable person with no choice. Lady Irene patted my arm. Your empathy is a good foundation for your future relationship, she suggested. I will sleep with the princess tonight to talk to her as an elder. She is frightened and alone. I can tell her about your childhood and how you rebuilt these ruins. I want her to know you are a man of substance, not a cold border warrior, so she might lower her guard. I was moved. My mother's intervention was far more natural than me forcing an awkward interaction. Her wisdom always provided the help I needed. I looked at her with gratitude. Thank you, mother. That is the best arrangement, though I hate to trouble you. Don't be silly. Lady Irene smiled firmly. I will do anything to help you two find peace. She urged me toward the stairs. Go rest in the third-floor study. You've had a long day. I nodded, feeling a weight lift. I glanced one last time at the door behind which the stranger lay, then walked toward the third floor. My steps felt lighter and more resolute. Perhaps this marriage, initially seen as a political burden, was not a hopeless dead end. I had a wise mother to guide me, and the princess did not seem unreasonable or arrogant. Deep in the night, inside Carnford Castle's master bedroom, the fireplace crackled, casting warm, dancing shadows against the stone walls, dispelling the spring chill. The princess, now in a soft cotton nightgown, lay on the fur-lined bed. Lady Irene lay beside her, providing a comforting warmth. The room smelled of the mother's gentle scent mixed with the cool stone of the castle. Louise curled up, feeling a rare sense of safety, having feared a much harsher first night. She had dreaded being forced to fulfill her duties to a stranger. Even if Lord Carl was praised as handsome, being intimate with a man she didn't love felt like torture. She had secretly resolved to remain chaste for Henry back in place. Lady Irene's presence, however, dispelled most of her fear. She was deeply grateful not to be facing her husband alone. She wondered if a mother this kind meant Lord Carl was also gentle at heart. Recalling his earlier defense of her, Louise felt even calmer. Your Highness, are you still awake? Lady Irene asked softly. Louise turned to face her, seeing the warmth in the elder's eyes. Please, call me Louise, she whispered, feeling a sense of reliance. Of course, Louise, Lady Irene replied, tucking the blanket around her. Silence filled the room, save for the crackling candles. Lady Irene spoke gently. You've seen today that Carl is a good-hearted, perhaps overly emotional, child. Louise listened quietly, staring at the canopy. She had indeed sensed a hidden, awkward concern behind his stiff demeanor. He isn't good at expressing himself, but he protected you today to spare you further embarrassment, Lady Irene noted. Louise recalled him firmly postponing the wedding and signaling his mother to take her away. A warmth spread through her, and she nodded slightly. I haven't been here long, but I've seen him pour his heart into rebuilding this land, working tirelessly, Lady Irene continued. Louise's thoughts drifted to the dark land outside. She remembered the neat, albeit humble, huts she had seen on the way. The serfs, though ragged, no longer looked dead-eyed. They had a spark of hope she hadn't seen in the capital's refugee camps. She remembered the bright-eyed girl who had peeked at her. You are right, my lady, Louise replied sincerely. Lady Irene took Louise's hand. I know this marriage feels unfair and frightening to you. But believe me, beneath his hardened shell, he is a gentle man who knows how to respect others. Lady Irene looked her in the eyes. He will give you time and respect your wishes. He will never force you. This promise acted as a shield, dispelling Louise's deepest fears. Her tense shoulders finally relaxed. her facade crumbling before such genuine kindness. She leaned into Lady Irene's embrace like a young animal seeking shelter. The motherly scent enveloped her. Overwhelming exhaustion washed over her, mingled with a newfound sense of peace. Louise closed her eyes, pressing her cheek against Lady Irene's soft clothes, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. She recalled her late mother, a figure now blurred by the distance of childhood. In this cold northern frontier, Lady Irene's warmth was the only anchor Louise had to cling to. She sobbed silently, burying herself in this brief sanctuary until exhaustion pulled her into sleep. Lady Irene smiled, tucked the quilt around the girl, and hummed a soft lullaby from the south. At dawn, I woke on my makeshift cot in the study. Away from the suffocating master bedroom, my mind was clear. I washed and headed downstairs. The guest room was open, and sounds from the master bedroom suggested the princess and my mother were awake. I knocked. Lady Irene invited me in. The room was warm from the fireplace. Princess Louise sat at her vanity, her maids Lena and another styling her hair. Lady Irene stood by, checking the white wedding dress embroidered with Plantagenet flowers. Lady Irene smiled at me, urging me to prepare as Albert had been pressing for the ceremony to begin. I nodded, my gaze lingering briefly on the dress before I regained my composure. I asked about the wedding feast, noting I had eaten the previous night's banquet. Lady Irene chided me for consuming the princess's welcome feast. She assured me the kitchen had prepared a fresh, respectable meal for the wedding. I went to the Lord's Hall, which had been transformed. The room was clean, smelling of fresh food. The long oak table was set with a white linen cloth. It featured roasted suckling pig, goose, sausages, and ham. There were stews, fresh bread, and rare fruits from the south. Local smoked fish and vegetables rounded out the hearty, if less extravagant, spread. Barrels of ale and fine wine were also provided. It was a respectable feast for the northern frontier. Albert stood in the hall, looking anxious and grim. He urged me to proceed immediately, citing the Queen Mother's impatience and the risk of delay. I promised the ceremony would conclude today. Albert's tension eased slightly. Albert requested space in the outer city for his staff to stay and assist the princess. He asked for land to build temporary housing, promising not to drain the Lord's manor. I refused, stating all resources were dedicated to housing refugees and building defenses. Albert offered to fund the construction himself if I provided the land. I agreed, allowing them to build in the outer city provided they followed Mr. Moore's planning. Albert was annoyed by my cold, transactional attitude, which he felt lacked proper respect for royalty. Knowing he was in my territory, Albert swallowed his pride and thanked me. I ignored him and watched the stairs, ready to finish the formality. A maid reported to Albert, who signaled the musicians. Solemn music filled the hall, creating an atmosphere of ritual. All eyes turned to the stone staircase. Princess Louise appeared, wearing her wedding dress. The silk and lace gown, embroidered with gold and silver Plantagenet flowers, shimmered in the candlelight. She wore a small diamond crown and a veil, looking regal despite her fatigue. Her maids supported her long train. I watched her descend, my heart heavy. My emotions were far more complex than my calm exterior suggested. Despite the political nature of the marriage and my lingering feelings for another, I felt a stir. Seeing the beautiful princess, I felt an inexplicable tremor. Their fates were now bound. In the eyes of the law, they were partners. The weight of this connection brought a strange, unfamiliar sensation. It was my first marriage in either life. I steeled myself, stepped forward, and offered my hand as she reached the bottom. Louise hesitated, then placed her gloved hand in mine. My grip was steady as I led her toward the platform. A royal bishop in ornate robes waited with a scripture. They stood before him as he began the solemn vows. Do you take Louise von Heinrich as your wife, to love and cherish in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I looked at Louise, my voice steady and calm. I do. Louise von Heinrich, do you take me as your husband, to love and cherish in sickness and in health, until death do you part? Louise took a breath, her voice trembling slightly beneath her veil, yet firm. I do. Next came the exchange of rings. I took an antique ring, set with a fine sapphire, a Schmidt family heirloom, from the velvet cushion held by Edgar. Kneeling, I took Louise's hand and slid the ring onto her finger. The cold metal made her fingers curl slightly. Louise then took a simple gold ring from her maid and placed it on my finger. The bishop raised his hands. In the name of the goddess and by the authority of His Majesty the King, I declare me and Louise von Plantagenet officially husband and wife. Applause and cheers filled the Lord's Hall. The royal delegation and Confort officials put on a festive display, regardless of their true thoughts. Albert brought over a silver cup of red wine. Following tradition, the couple shared the drink to symbolize unity. I drank first, then passed it to Louise. Louise took a small sip. The spice made her frown, but the ritual was complete. The wedding banquet began as everyone took their seats. I occupied my usual seat at the head of the oak table. Beside me, a new high-back chair with a white tablecloth had been added. It was the seat of the new lady of the Lord, Louise. I pulled the chair out for her. Louise nodded in thanks, sat, and I took my place beside her. The banquet atmosphere warmed with the toasts, candlelight reflecting off the guests. Confort officials and the royal delegation began to toast the couple. Princess Louise maintained her poise, offering only a slight nod and a symbolic sip of wine for each toast, as per court etiquette. Her aloof demeanor created an invisible barrier between her and the rowdy northern frontier feast. I, by contrast, was entirely different. I accepted every toast, whether from my own men like Edgar and Brendan or the scrutinizing royal officials, downing my large pewter mug each time. Despite the heavy drinking, my eyes remained sharp and clear. After a few rounds, I seemed even more spirited. I stood up and walked steadily toward Albert. Albert, a rigid man who rarely drank, was sipping water. Seeing me approach, he stood up with a stiff smile. "Mr. Albert," I boomed with forced warmth. "Thank you for escorting the princess from the royal capital. I must toast you." Albert waved his hands nervously. "Lord, you are too kind. It is my duty. I have a poor head for wine." "Nonsense," I interrupted, thrusting a full glass into Albert's hand. "You must drink. Otherwise, you look down on Confort and on me." My loud, drunken-like bullying drew everyone's attention. Albert turned pale, trapped. He looked to the princess for help, but Louise merely watched, silent. He had no choice but to accept. "Then, I shall oblige." Albert closed his eyes and downed the spicy liquid. The intensity was too much. He began to cough violently, his face turning red as he doubled over in a humiliating display. I patted his back, laughing loudly. "Excellent. A true sport, Mr. Albert." "Another." "No. Please, Lord, have mercy." Albert retreated, practically fleeing. Louise witnessed the entire scene. She recalled how Albert had treated her with impatient disdain during their journey when she was ill, causing her great embarrassment. Seeing me use this crude yet precise method to avenge her, she was surprised, then covered her mouth to hide a genuine smile. When she looked at me again, her gaze was softer. Though the marriage began out of necessity, my nominal husband had defended her dignity in his own way. "Thank you, Lord Karl," she thought. As the banquet quieted, Princess Louise excused herself, citing fatigue, and returned to her room. Resentful royal officials, wanting to retaliate for Albert, took turns trying to get me drunk to humiliate me. They underestimated me. Though I was no expert drinker, I was far more resilient than these pampered courtiers. I accepted every drink, my expression calm and my eyes growing clearer. The officials, meanwhile, became red-faced and unsteady, eventually needing to be carried away in disgrace. Soon, the hall fell silent, save for the crackling of the fireplace. Only the core Confort officials, Edgar, Maul, Brendan, and Leon, remained. The formal banquet had reverted to a typical Confort war council, the air thick with the scent of wine and incense. I sat at the head of the table, idly cutting cold venison, lost in thought. Edgar, sitting to my right, sipped his wine, his expression wise and steady. After a long silence, I spoke, my voice unusually casual. "Edgar, are you married?" Edgar paused, then smiled self-deprecatingly. "I've served the Schmidt family since I was young, clerk, estate manager, and now your aide. I've been like a spinning top for the family. I never had the time or stability to consider a family of my own." He added, "Though I am older than you, in the matter of marriage, you have certainly moved ahead of me." I tried to smile, but it faded into a look of deep confusion. I leaned back, staring at the fire. Ahead of you? Honestly, Edgar, I don't know how to face her. Everyone knew who she was. She is my wife in name, isn't she? I asked, perhaps to myself. When she walked down the stairs in her dress and placed her hand in mine, I felt something strange, a sense of responsibility as a husband. I sighed, confused. Wife, children, a home. Isn't this the most basic pursuit for any man? With these, one finds peace. Can I be an exception? This is just the beginning. I trailed off, but Edgar understood. Could I remain loyal to Charlotte? Would time and reality erode my vows in this marriage to a woman who was merely a name? Edgar replied calmly. My lord, life is long and full of variables. You may be determined today, but tomorrow you might find a different path. Don't bind yourself with heavy vows. Follow your heart and accept change. He looked at me. Regardless, one thing is certain. Conford, this land, and its subjects are your true foundation. In a sense, Conford is your true wife and child. Nothing should shake your resolve to protect it. That is your duty as lord. Edgar's words cooled my chaotic mind. Indeed, Conford's future was my inescapable burden. Neglecting duty for personal sentiment would be a grave mistake. Focusing on territorial development was the best way to handle the current situation. Seeing my clarity, Edgar smiled. However, my lord, I sincerely hope this isn't the only wedding of your life. I paused, grasping the implication. Edgar hoped that one day, I could be free to marry my true love. A warmth surged in me. I picked up my wine glass. I silently clinked my glass against Edgar's. The sound echoed like a silent promise. As night deepened, the hall emptied. Edgar, ever frugal, distributed the remaining banquet food to the refugees, earning their gratitude. For me, the final ritual remained the bridal chamber. I sat in the hall, downing another glass of wine. The alcohol burned but failed to numb my mind. I had drunk bottles, yet the intoxication remained just out of reach. My tension kept me sober. I avoided washing, fearing the cold water would sober me further. I walked upstairs, unsteady and smelling of wine. The hallway was dim. Anna was asleep, and the princess's maids were on the third floor. Only I and the princess remained. I knew royal eyes were watching. I had to enter. I paused, then pushed open the door. The fireplace cast a warm glow. Princess Louise lay curled on the far side of the bed, back to the door. I noticed her back stiffen and tremble as I entered. Sighing, I removed my coat, blew out the lamp, and left only the firelight. I lay on the edge, back to her. They lay together, yet worlds apart. I remained wide awake. Images of Charlotte, Anna, the princess, and Albert flashed through my mind. I tossed and turned, the bed creaking. Are you unable to sleep too? Louise's soft, timid voice broke the silence. It was Louise. I stiffened, then relaxed, grunting a soft yes. Silence followed. Louise spoke again, more steadily. Lord Carl, Anna and I talked a lot yesterday. I guess my mother had tried to bridge the gap between them. I turned over, staring at the ceiling. What did she say? Louise replied. She said you are a responsible lord who cares for your people. She paused. I can see it myself. Though Conford is simple, the people here are different from the refugees in the capital. Their eyes have light, a will to live. I know you brought this change. In these turbulent times, few nobles treat commoners as people rather than numbers. I laughed dryly. Are you flattering me? Louise turned, panicked. No, I mean it. I truly believe it. I softened. Don't be nervous. I'm not blaming you. I added coldly. Don't overthink it. This is just my duty. A stable, prosperous Conford is a transaction for my own power. Louise recalled Anna's words. I was bad at expressing emotion. She didn't feel offended. She agreed with Anna. I did so much good, yet hid behind a cold shell. To her, this awkwardness felt like clumsy sincerity. She replied firmly. Regardless, your sincerity toward your people is clear. You are a good lord. In the dark, I felt a ripple of warmth at being recognized. No one dislikes sincere praise, especially from a beautiful princess. I whispered, thank you. Louise felt relieved. I hope to be of help to you and Conford in the future, Louise whispered. Understood, I replied briefly. I turned away, closed my eyes, and prepared to sleep. Louise turned to the other side. Silence filled the room, save for the crackling fire, as Louise lay awake, lost in thought. Lady Irene was right. I made no improper moves. This respect brought Louise relief and a sense of gratitude on this cold, strange wedding night. She wondered if this seemingly cold lord might one day understand her secret regarding Henry. The thought brought her hope. The night was better than expected. She drifted into a peaceful sleep. I awoke the next morning with a dull headache and dry throat. Groggily, I tried to avoid the sunlight, wanting to sleep longer. As I shifted, I felt something soft and warm, smelling of flowers, and heard steady breathing. The realization struck me like lightning. I woke fully, memories of my wedding and marriage flooding back. Beside me lay my new wife, Princess Louise. As I moved, Louise stirred and woke up. She turned, blinking her blue eyes. I awkwardly pulled back my arm, and their eyes met. Both felt a mix of confusion, embarrassment, and novelty. It was their first morning waking up as a married couple. A tense silence hung in the air. Louise broke the silence, her voice raspy. "Good morning, Lord Carl." I cleared my throat. "Good morning." I apologized for my arm, unsure how to explain the accidental touch. Accustomed to reading others, Louise observed my condition. Seeing my headache and disheveled state, she understood I was hungover. "It's fine. Please don't worry," she said gently. She noticed the water jug on the side table. Getting up, she poured a glass of warm water and handed it to me. "Drink this. You'll feel better." I thanked her and drank it down. The water eased my throat and headache. "You should rest more," Louise said considerately. "I'll go have breakfast prepared." She sought to escape the awkwardness. I meant to decline, but Louise had already left the room. I remained alone, the scent of her perfume lingering. I stared at the empty room, speechless. I sighed and lay back down, burying my face in the pillow. The pillow still held the warmth and scent of her presence. Her proximity made my heart skip a beat. Since Charlotte left, I hadn't felt such closeness. It was an intimacy I thought I had lost forever. Reason told me not to indulge in this warmth, as it didn't belong to the one I truly loved. Yet, my body craved the companionship. The stranger's scent brought me a strange, long-missed sense of peace. When I woke again, it was midday. My headache had faded, leaving me feeling lazy. I sat up, finding the room empty and the warmth gone. I dressed and headed to the small living room on the second floor. Maids were busy setting the table, and the room smelled of food. Since Lady Irene arrived, the household routines had changed. With the princess present, the lord's manor could no longer operate like a military camp. Lady Irene and Louise entered, chatting and laughing. They spotted me, looking disheveled and groggy. Lady Irene teased, Our hard-working lord is finally up? I've never seen you sleep in, especially not on your wedding day." Embarrassed, I replied, "Mother, it's nothing. I just drank too much last night." I realized my excuse for sleeping in, that Louise was my wife, sounded suspicious, as if I were hiding something. Lady Irene caught the implication, smiling meaningfully at me and a blushing, downcast Louise. Louise felt embarrassed by the teasing, but found the warmth between mother and son comforting. Lady Irene laughed and ended the topic, urging me to wash up for lunch. During lunch, the atmosphere was pleasant as Lady Irene kept the conversation light. I, however, was distracted and barely ate. I soon excused myself, telling my mother and Louise I had urgent official business. Lady Irene and Louise both nodded in understanding. I stood, straightened my robes, and headed straight for my office. At the intelligence office, Richter stood to salute. I skipped pleasantries and asked about the team. Richter confirmed the 10-man core team was ready. I sat and gestured for Richter to do the same, asking for their backgrounds. Richter presented the list. 1 was Franz, 5 were new refugees, and 4 were long-time Conford residents. I questioned how Richter found talent after Brendan had already recruited the best. Richter explained that his standards differed from Brendan's. He didn't need frontline soldiers. The 5 refugees included a former caravan guard expert at reading people. 2 were rangers skilled in tracking and survival, and the final 2 were unique. Richter lowered his voice. The last 2 were fugitives. 1 killed a tax collector, the other a black market thug. He noted that Brendan would never accept such undisciplined men into the military. I listened, tapping my finger on the table. Richter argued that these men possessed the ruthlessness and street smarts necessary for intelligence work. These flaws were actually assets for undercover operations and shadow dealings. The 4 local residents were more reliable. They included a well-informed tavern owner, an expert hunter, a meticulous clerk, and a retired scout, all ideal for analysis and internal monitoring. I nodded, acknowledging the pragmatic choice, but warning that such men were a double-edged sword. I emphasized that loyalty was paramount to ensure this sword didn't turn on them. Richter solemnly promised to remain vigilant. He outlined his control strategy: direct leadership, strict compartmentalization, and single-line reporting. He would ensure the Corps remained in trusted hands, with future promotions based on long-term loyalty. I approved and asked how they planned to track the unknown number of Solonian spies. Richter presented a detailed report he had prepared. He had consulted Thorstein, the defected Solonian officer, to analyze their espionage tactics. I was impressed. I had forgotten that Thorstein was a goldmine of information regarding Solonian military operations. I admired Richter's initiative in utilizing this resource. I praised the idea and began reading the report. Richter explained that Solonian espionage was systematic, not impulsive. They had long prioritized internal sabotage over direct sieges. Tactics included bribing or coercing local nobles and officials. They also infiltrated targets by disguising elite spies as refugees or craftsmen. These spies spread rumors, caused panic, and performed sabotage to weaken defenses from within. Richter cited the fall of Frostguard as a prime example. Solonians had used smugglers to infiltrate spies who, upon the attack, ignited fires and blew up a powder magazine. The resulting chaos paralyzed the defenders, allowing the Solon army to take the city. Afterward, they sent hundreds of spies disguised as refugees into the interior. These agents spread rumors of impending doom, causing mass panic and riots. It took Count Rockefeller's strict reforms to finally purge the influence. Richter noted that under Harold, these tactics were now refined by the defector Leon, who knew the border defenses intimately. He suspected the current spies were part of this new Leon-Harold model. I grew grave, realizing the severity of the threat. I asked for the specific countermeasures and deployment plans. Richter reported that, with Edgar's help, they had already begun infiltrating key nodes. They placed agents in a grocery store and a grain shop, prime locations for gathering rumors. 3 others were sent to the construction site of Fort No. 2. Richter reasoned that spies without land would likely hide among the laborers at the construction site, where management was loose and the workforce was transient. Richter added that the remaining men were embedded within the shanty town as refugees to monitor the transient population for suspicious newcomers. I nodded, approving of Richter's clear and pragmatic deployment strategy. Agreed, proceed with this plan, I confirmed. Richter noted the order and mentioned that Franz, whom I had requested to see, was waiting outside. I set aside my report and told Richter to send him in. Richter exited. Franz stood in the shadows of the outer city wall, his gaze scanning the crowd with practiced vigilance. Though dressed in common rags, his posture and sharp eyes betrayed a disciplined, alert nature. Richter approached him, stating, "Franz, the Lord wishes to see you. Follow me." Franz stopped his surveillance and replied calmly, "Yes, Captain." As they walked, Richter whispered, "This is your chance and a test. The Lord is interviewing you personally. Answer honestly. Don't exaggerate or hide anything. He values you, so make the most of this," Richter emphasized. Franz replied with steady composure, "Understood, Captain. I know what to do." They entered the makeshift office, a sparse room that Franz scanned discreetly. The room was raw stone with minimal furniture, smelling faintly of dust and mold. It resembled a frontline command post more than a lord's manor. Franz maintained his composure and approached the desk. Standing 3 paces away, he knelt and saluted with military precision. I smiled gently, waving him up. "Rise. We don't stand on such ceremony in Carnford, especially during internal discussions." Franz stood up immediately. He snapped into a sharp, standard Carnford military salute. I nodded, clearly impressed by his adaptability. "Good." I gestured to a chair. "Sit. Let's talk." Franz glanced at Richter for confirmation before moving. This gesture showed he understood the chain of command. Richter signaled him to sit, adding, "The Lord is the highest authority here." This confirmed to me that Franz respected the hierarchy. Franz sat straight, hands on his knees, waiting for the interrogation. I went straight to the point. "How did you identify the Solon spy at checkpoint 3? Franz explained. He claimed to be a refugee from the Black Forest Valley, his home burned by Solonians. His answers to standard questions seemed flawless. However, his micro-expressions and nervous fidgeting gave him away. I stopped my comrade from letting him pass and decided to probe deeper. I asked about local geography and the Lord's family details, like the name of the stream east of Black Forest Castle. He hesitated and called it Blackwater Creek, but locals know it as Whitestone Creek. He also failed to correctly describe the local coat of arms and the castle tower structure. Most importantly, his accent slipped into an inner pass dialect when he spoke quickly, despite his attempt to mimic a northern accent. Given these inconsistencies, I knew he was lying and detained him. I tapped my desk, listening intently. Sharp observation. But how do you know such specific details about the North? Franz replied. Before becoming a soldier, I was a caravan guard leader. For over a decade, I traveled across the northern frontier, memorizing castle crests, layouts, and terrain to ensure our safety. That information was my livelihood. It's etched in my mind. I nodded in realization. That explains your precision. Your experience with all walks of life gave you an eye for human nature. Do you understand why I moved you to the intelligence department? Franz nodded steadily. I understand. My skills are better suited for discerning truth from lies in the shadows than standing in a rank-and-file formation. Exactly, I affirmed. Courage is common, but I need a strategist who can see through the shadows. This work requires wisdom, patience, and insight. I am at your command, Franz replied firmly. As long as I am fighting the Solonians and avenging my blood debt, I will go wherever you need me. I looked at him deeply. Tommy briefed me on your past and your hatred. I must be honest, I am not from the North. I haven't suffered as you have, and I won't offer hollow empathy. Franz's hands tightened, but he remained silent. We come from different pasts, but our goal is identical. My voice rose with intensity. I will kill the Solonians, drive these barbarians from the North, and wipe their tribe from existence. That is my vow as the Lord of Carnford. I leaned forward and asked Franz, will you use your talents to help me? Will you be the blade in the shadows that paves the way for our vengeance? Franz stood abruptly, his chest heaving. He knelt on one knee, his eyes burning with a mix of hatred, loyalty, and resolve. My lord, he rasped, his voice firm. I, Franz, swear to follow you until the Solonians are buried. This vow shall never waver. I studied him intently, as if sealing the oath into their very souls. Good. Rise, Franz, I said. From now on, you are Carnford's hidden blade against the Solonians. Richter will instruct you. Franz saluted, turned, and strode out. His gait was steady, reflecting a newfound sense of purpose. I watched him go, recognizing this as a deep covenant forged in shared hatred. This shadow war would be brutal. With Franz gone, only I and Richter remained. Richter stepped forward. My lord, the spy we captured has been fully interrogated and is of no further use. How shall we dispose of him? If he is useless, kill him, I replied coldly. Execute him publicly in the shanty town. Announce his crimes so everyone sees the cost of betraying Carnford. Use this to deter any other potential spies. I added, leave the body hanging on the flagpole for 3 days as a warning. Richter nodded solemnly. Understood, my lord. I will arrange it. Fort number 1 was complete. Unlike the main castle, which required heavy defenses, this fort was designed to repel small Solonian cavalry raids and serve as an administrative hub. Its design prioritized function over the castle's complexity. The walls were only 1 to 2 meters thick, insufficient against siege engines, and kept low, as wide-field surveillance wasn't the priority. There were no complex battlements, only simple watchtowers at the 4 cardinal points for the militia. It featured a single gate facing the main southern road. This layout facilitated trade and allowed for rapid lockdown during emergencies, minimizing defensive strain. Due to this standardized simplicity, construction was swift. The rammed earth structure looked like a sturdy box on the plains, offering reliable security to the surrounding farmers. The fort's management, from the commander to the logistics staff, consisted entirely of wounded veterans. The current commander was a veteran who had lost an arm in the siege. Though unable to fight, his combat experience, discipline, and literacy made him ideal for administration. Crucially, these veterans were fiercely loyal to me, who had given them a second chance at life. Entrusting them with these roles boosted morale among all soldiers who had bled for the territory. Foundations for Fort No. 2 and Fort No. 3 had already been broken on the plains. Refugees worked busily under foremen to excavate and transport stone. With the experience from Fort No. 1, construction had become a streamlined, efficient process. Maul had distributed standardized blueprints and manuals, overseeing only the critical milestones. He had delegated daily operations to his trained apprentices. These young men, now officials in the Ministry of Livelihood, supervised construction and logistics at various sites. They handled routine issues independently, only consulting Maul for major problems. This delegation freed Maul for higher-level planning and cultivated a new class of technical bureaucrats for Confort. Outside Fort No. 1, the training ground echoed with the shouts of 300 men. Led by veteran instructors, they practiced drills with wooden spears and mock muskets. This was the militia battalion, established for every fort to counter Solonian harassment while the standing army remained focused elsewhere. They farmed during the busy seasons and trained during the off-seasons. In war, they served as auxiliary forces for patrol and defense. This system worked because the northern frontier's agricultural model allowed for such training. The north was scarred by Solonian raids, leaving vast, underpopulated lands. This reality made the intensive farming of the south impossible. In the south, land was scarce, forcing farmers to maximize every inch through labor-intensive methods. Conford's wilderness required an extensive, low-yield approach. A typical northern household managed dozens of acres with minimal tools, relying on simple plows. Their harvests depended largely on the weather, leaving them at the mercy of the elements. Given the low population, intensive farming was impractical. The priority was simply to prevent famine. Efficiency could wait for future growth. This extensive agriculture had a hidden benefit. It required far less labor than southern farming. Outside of planting and harvest, the farmers had significant free time. They were not shackled to their fields year-round like their southern counterparts. This surplus time was the essential capital that made the militia system possible. Perhaps the Industrial Revolution in the West stemmed from labor freed from land-based constraints. Conversely, Eastern agrarian civilizations trapped populations in intensive farming, stifling the shift to new production methods. Conford is now leveraging this shift, transforming farmers into a defensive barrier at the Tunbeo training grounds. To incentivize training, I set a monthly stipend of 50 copper coins. Instead of a lump sum, I pay 5 coins per completed training session. A militiaman must attend 10 sessions to earn the full 50 coins. This pay-per-session model has clear benefits. It links pay directly to attendance and performance, preventing absenteeism and maintaining enthusiasm. For the Lord's Manor, it offers flexible, cost-controlled expenditures that adapt to the territory's fiscal health. Each militia battalion is capped at 300 men for optimal management and tactical cohesion. The force consists of 200 spearmen for defensive phalanxes, 60 musketeers, mostly matchlocks with some flintlocks, for firepower, and 40 support staff, including officers and signalers. This structure prioritizes firepower, with spearmen providing defense and musketeers handling offense. Merged with 19,581, I plan to equip battalions with light artillery like falconets or minion cannons once production capacity allows. This combined arms approach, artillery bombardment followed by musket volleys, would shatter enemy morale before they ever reach the spear wall. I considered the historical wagon fort tactics, but ultimately rejected them. Merged with 19585. First, the Solonians are already familiar with and have countermeasures for wagon forts. Second, the logistics required for such heavy, mobile defenses exceed Conford's current resources. Third, wagon forts are inherently defensive and slow, contradicting my strategic needs. The Solonians are ravaging the Plantagenet kingdom, which acts as the northern frontier's only shield. If the kingdom falls, Conford will be the Solonians' next target. To survive, I must eventually strike into Solonian-occupied territory to support the kingdom's main forces. This requires a mobile, offensive-capable force. Wagon forts are too cumbersome for such maneuvers. Thus, I opted for a flexible, firepower-focused militia structure capable of rapid deployment and long-range strikes. Currently, the militia serves as Conford's primary defense and a reserve for the regular army. Yet, I see immense potential in these farmers. Musketeers require less training and physical conditioning than traditional soldiers, allowing farmers to master basic drills quickly. This standardized structure also facilitates rapid expansion during wartime. I hope Hector's workshop will soon mass-produce flintlocks, allowing these trained militiamen to transition into a regular musket-based force. With additional artillery and cavalry training, they could then face the Solonians in open-field battles. On the training ground, militiamen drill under the sun, preparing for the future. This training is a seed planted for Conford's survival. When the crisis arrives, these farmers may become the decisive factor in the war. In a corner of the training ground, a silent figure stands like a wooden stake. The afternoon sun highlights his lean, upright frame. This is Oliver, a man whose fate is tied to the Tunbeo. Unlike the recruits in rough, patched cloth, Oliver wears his faded, mended Conford veteran uniform. Though it clashes with his role as a militia instructor, he wears it as a symbol of his dignity and connection to fallen comrades. His appearance makes him stand out among the grimy recruits. Given his performance in the legendary defense of Conford, he should have been in the main legion. Many noted he deserved at least a rank of platoon leader. His former peers have already been promoted. His old squad leader, William, has even been promoted to company commander in the main legion. However, fate dealt Oliver a cruel blow. A crossbow bolt during the final battle left him with a permanently crippled leg. He now walks with a distinct, uncontrollable limp. This disability prevents him from meeting the rigorous physical demands of the main legion. He could have taken a generous pension and retired to a quiet life on his own land. Even William urged him to take the offer. But Oliver refused. He could not bear a life of idle farming. The army and the battlefield are in his blood, and he insisted on staying. Thanks to William's intercession and his own reputation, he was granted the position of militia instructor. Though the drop in status from veteran to instructor is clear, Oliver is content. Staying in the familiar military camp, hearing the drills and orders, allows Oliver to still contribute to the land he bled for. This is far better than fading away as a forgotten, disabled veteran. Oliver's sharp, critical eyes track every movement of the 300 newly recruited militia on the training ground. The Tunbeo is primitive, protected only by a thin, man-high earthen wall bordering newly cleared fields. The training ground is merely a flat patch of dirt outside these walls. Families and curious children loiter nearby, pointing and chattering as if watching a spectacle. Oliver frowns, but his focus remains entirely on the raw recruits. A drum beats a monotonous, stubborn rhythm. The 300 militia are arranged in 6 ranks according to standard Conford Army doctrine. The center holds 100 spearmen. The flanks feature 60 musketeers each, backed by 50 spearmen. The rear spearmen are meant to fill gaps when musketeers reload. A few meters of space are kept between the spear and musket formations for maneuverability. Initially, following the drums and horns, the formation holds, though movements are stiff and clumsy. Chaos erupts when the instructor orders the musketeers to retreat for reloading and the rear spearmen to advance. Move. Spearmen forward. Musketeers back, the deputy instructor screams. The recruits collide. Musketeers retreating crash into advancing spearmen, causing falls and cursing. The formation dissolves. The rotation time passes, yet the formation remains a tangled mess. Onlookers jeer and laugh, turning the field into a noisy marketplace. Oliver's face darkens. He charges into the chaos, his limp gait surprisingly fast and determined. He refuses a cane, viewing it as weakness, and uses his baton as an extension of his fury. Idiots! Oliver roars, his baton striking the backs and legs of the slowest recruits. Left spearmen, where are your eyes? Right musketeers, watch your retreat path. Did the dogs eat the manual? The militia fear the short-tempered, limping instructor. Oliver's severity is notorious. He pours his own bitterness into his harsh training. Driven by his rage and blows, the recruits finally complete the botched tactical rotation. For the final check, any musketeer with an unkept or extinguished match is forced to run laps until exhaustion. I use this painful method to ensure they understand that negligence on the battlefield leads to death. Dismissed, Oliver finally rasps. The exhausted militia scramble to scatter like ants. Oliver slams his baton against a wooden barrel with a thunderous crack, freezing them in place. Dismissed in formation. Line up. Leave the field properly. The militia reform, shuffling away in an orderly, albeit crooked, line until they are out of Oliver's sight. The field empties, leaving Oliver alone, panting. The sunset casts a long, lonely shadow over his limping, stubborn figure. He watches the recruits vanish into the plains. His harshness fades, replaced by a complex, hidden emotion, envy. I envy their healthy legs, capable of running and maneuvering, the potential to get it right. I envy their sound bodies, capable of enduring the intensity of war. These are things I, a veteran with a knee shattered by a crossbow bolt, have lost forever. It is not just the loss of a leg, but the loss of my future and glory as a soldier. Bitterness and frustration tighten my throat. I sigh, a sound of profound loneliness in the empty field. The sunset stretches my shadow into a distorted shape, mirroring my inner state. Leaning on my baton, I prepare to return to my cold, empty room. As I turn, familiar footsteps and cheerful calls approach. Hey, Oliver. Done with training. Oliver turns, surprised. 4 or 5 men approach, wearing the standard uniforms of the main legion, looking far more professional than the militia. They are my old comrades. Roderick, a tall, cheerful platoon leader. Mark, a silent, sharp-eyed marksman. Elton, the optimist, and Tommy, a young man who survived the brutal urban warfare in Confort alongside them, now hardened by time. Seeing them, Oliver's mood softens, though he maintains his stern facade, grumbling, done. A bunch of idiots. Militia are just mud that won't stick to the wall. Roderick claps Oliver on the shoulder. They're militia, old friend. You can't hold them to the standards of the main legion. Other Tunbeo instructors are relaxed. You're running this like a recruit camp. Oliver bristles, his injured leg throbbing. I will use combat standards. My soldiers won't be trash. If the Solonians attack, will they show mercy because they're militia? I'm training them to survive. Roderick's smile fades. He understands that beneath Oliver's stubbornness lies the deep psychological trauma of his disability. Oliver's harsh, competitive demeanor was a desperate attempt to prove his worth despite his disability, masking his deep-seated insecurity. Sighing, Roderick softened his tone. Fine, fine. You're the instructor here, so you call the shots. Changing the subject with a smile, he added, enough of that. We old friends finally have a day off. Let's go grab a drink and catch up. Oliver instinctively wanted to refuse. He preferred the protective shell of his work over the vulnerability of social gatherings. No, I have things to do, he replied dryly. What could you possibly have? Roderick interrupted, grabbing Oliver's shoulder firmly. No wife or kids waiting at home, just staring at walls. Don't be a killjoy. He steered Oliver toward the training ground exit. Come on, brother Oliver, join us, young Tommy urged, his eyes filled with respect. Don't be such a loner, old man, Elton teased, while Silent Mark nodded in agreement. Seeing their sincere faces and feeling the warmth of Roderick's grip, Oliver's refusals died on his lips. Deep down, he craved an escape from his crushing loneliness. His stiff posture relaxed, and the icy mask of his expression cracked slightly. He gave a subtle, awkward nod and grunted. Fine. That's the spirit. Roderick laughed, ushering the group toward the tavern. My treat. The group escorted the limping Oliver toward the tavern in the Tunbeo. The setting sun stretched their shadows into one. Though silent, Oliver felt the suffocating weight of his isolation ease under the camaraderie. For this evening, he could set aside his instructor persona and simply be Oliver. They arrived at the most popular tavern in Fort No. 1. Funded by the Grim Caravan, the tavern occupied the busiest spot in the residential district. Unlike the rough local brews, their ale used southern recipes, offering a rich, frothy taste. It was priced affordably, allowing soldiers and farmers to indulge regularly. With hearty, Generous portions of meat and hot dishes, it was the favorite local hangout. The owner had expanded the tavern by buying adjacent houses to accommodate growing crowds. Workers were currently adding a second floor to handle the demand. It was the peak hour of the evening. Entering, they were hit by a wave of malt, roasted meat, tobacco, sweat, and boisterous noise. The hall was packed with laborers and soldiers drinking and laughing. A sharp waiter recognized Roderick and squeezed them into a corner table. Roderick immediately ordered several large mugs of ale and expensive dishes like ribs and sausages. Mark hesitated, pulling Roderick's sleeve. "Why so much? I've got a mortgage and money is tight this month." Roderick laughed and slapped his back. "Relax. It's my treat. Eat up." Mark thanked him, relieved. The cold ale arrived quickly. Roderick downed a mug, sighing in satisfaction. Nothing beats this after a month in the barracks." He then asked Mark, "Wait, you bought a house? Why bother with a mortgage when you have free officer housing?" Mark blushed slightly and said shyly, I'm not a bachelor anymore." Everyone stared in shock, even Oliver, who looked up from his drink. "Mark, when did this happen?" Elton punched his shoulder playfully. "You kept that quiet." Roderick added, "Who is she? How did you meet?" Mark explained, "The Tunbeo leader introduced us. She's a refugee from the Inner Pass. Her family is gone. She's a good person. I was going to tell you once it was official," he added. "Impressive, Mark," Elton teased. "But a mortgage takes years to pay off. Can you handle it?" Mark nodded steadily. "It's pressure, but manageable. I save most of my military pay. Having a house makes it feel like a real home." He turned the tables. "What about you guys? You're not getting any younger. Why not settle down?" Elton waved him off. "No way. I love my freedom. Why tie myself down with debt?" Mark frowned. "That's the wrong mindset. We're soldiers. We don't know if we'll survive tomorrow. You need to leave a legacy." Elton laughed, downing more ale. "Exactly. That's why I spend my money now, to enjoy life. If I die in battle, I don't want to leave behind savings I never enjoyed. I spend every coin I get." He spoke as if this were the ultimate wisdom. Mark shook his head and asked Roderick, "What about you? You're a young platoon leader. Surely you have admirers." Roderick smiled, his expression distant. "I'm still young. No rush." Mark teased, "Young? The families in the Tunbeo have probably been eyeing you for a while." Roderick chewed his sausage. "That's their business. I haven't met the right one. You can't force these things." His gaze drifted across the crowd, lost in thought. Mark teased Roderick about his romantic ideals, but Roderick deflected the topic, urging everyone to drink instead. Roderick laughed off the comment and raised his glass to toast. The group cheered, their glasses clinking amidst the tavern's noise. Oliver joined in, his hardened, battle-worn heart softening slightly under the warmth of his comrades' company. He drained his ale as the conversation shifted to Tommy, the youngest among them. Mark pointed his fork at Tommy, expressing genuine envy for his bright future. He recalled Tommy's success in the recent recruitment drive at France City. Mark noted that Tommy had been handpicked by Edgar for the new Culture and Propaganda Department. Mark praised the position as safe, well-paid, and far superior to the life of a frontline soldier. He joked that Tommy was lucky to be lecturing at settlements rather than rolling in the mud. To everyone's surprise, Tommy looked miserable, sighing deeply. Tommy poked his cold sausage, dismissing the glory of his desk job. He expressed a desperate desire to return to the front lines, fight the Solonians, and wield a real weapon. Oliver, usually silent, felt a rare, faint smile touch his face at Tommy's heartfelt complaint. The smile held complex emotions, including a fleeting sense of envy. Oliver deeply empathized with Tommy's longing to prove his worth on the battlefield. He, too, craved the roar of war and the camaraderie of brothers in arms. However, the smile vanished, replaced by bitter loneliness. Their situations were fundamentally different. Tommy's reassignment was temporary. He could return to combat at any time. Youth was on Tommy's side, while Oliver's gaze fell to his own useless leg. His knee had been shattered by a crossbow bolt, a permanent injury. This disability had forever stripped him of his status as a combat soldier. While Tommy lost a chance to fight, Oliver had lost his entire future as a warrior. The loss was absolute and irreversible. A sharp, suffocating sense of helplessness gripped his heart. He downed his ale, trying to drown his surging emotions. Roderick, observant as ever, noted the shift in the group's mood. He saw the fleeting smile and the subsequent gloom on Oliver's face. He understood that Tommy's words had struck a painful chord. Realizing the impact, he moved to break the tension. Roderick raised his glass, calling for a toast to their survival. The others joined in, shouting, "To survival!" The clinking glasses briefly dispelled the gloom surrounding Oliver. Yet, they all knew some wounds were too deep for mere toasts to heal. Oliver's future remained as cold and long as the northern frontier night. His comrades could only offer their presence as support. In the Place City Palace, the weekly council meeting was underway, though the atmosphere was bizarrely lax. Young King Sigmund lounged lazily on his jewel-encrusted throne. Despite his youth, his eyes reflected a spoiled and restless nature. Shockingly, he openly embraced a scantily clad court lady. The lady fed him fruit while he fondled her, ignoring the ministers below. The king continued his lewd behavior, completely disregarding the court. The nobles reported their duties as if this were entirely normal. They knew the king was a mere puppet. True power lay with the woman behind him. Queen Mother Katharina von Eisenberg held the real authority. Dressed in regal purple, Katharina surveyed the room with sharp, hawk-like eyes. She controlled the proceedings with precise questions and absolute focus. The Minister of War reported that the Solonians were quiet, and Count Rockefort confirmed road progress toward Conford. Katharina acknowledged the report with a curt nod. Another minister announced that Princess Louise had arrived in Conford and married me. He added that the wedding was delayed by 1 day due to the princess's travel fatigue. King Sigmund waved the news away, his focus remaining on the court lady. A cold glint flashed in Katharina's eyes, though she quickly regained her composure. Queen Mother Catherine lifted her chin, her voice authoritative. The marriage between Princess Louise and the Northern Lord symbolizes our kingdom's unity. Minor schedule adjustments are trivial. Let Albert serve the princess diligently and monitor Conford closely. To her, Louise's marriage removed a political threat from the capital. A 1-day delay was merely dust on her grand chessboard. With Albert planted in Conford, she felt confident controlling the border lord. The Lord Keeper of the Seal, a rigid Eisenberg loyalist, stepped forward, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Your Majesties, the Duke Schmidt family has been using the marriage to expand their influence across the southern provinces. Their caravans claim royal exemption under the guise of supplying the princess, but they are merely lining their own pockets. This disrupts the market, drains tax revenue, and insults the crown. I demand you restrain them." Before Catherine could react, King Sigmund, annoyed at being disturbed, exploded in a rage. He slammed his throne, his voice shrill. "How dare they use our name? Send my grandfather, Duke Eisenberg, and his Blackstone cavalry south. Flatten the Schmidt castle, arrest the old man, and execute his entire clan." The hall fell into stunned silence. The ministers exchanged looks of disbelief and contempt. Executing the Schmidt clan would mean killing the king's own brother-in-law, and potentially implicating Princess Louise herself. Furthermore, the Schmidt family held the South with a powerful navy and impregnable fortifications. Sending the land-based Blackstone cavalry to attack the southern river fortresses was suicidal. Catherine's face darkened. She glared at her son with disappointment. He was a fool, useless for anything but pleasure. She had to intervene. She coughed, drawing everyone's attention with cold authority. "The Schmidt family is loyal. The marriage proves our unity. Their caravans likely acted out of zeal to supply the princess and Conford. This is a minor misunderstanding, not a cause for war." She dismissed the issue, ordering a letter sent to Lord I in Conford to instruct my father to be more discreet. "Remind them to avoid suspicion. We are family now, and harmony is paramount." This maneuver was a classic lift high, drop low tactic. She pacified the accuser while protecting the Schmidts, shifting the burden onto me. The Lord Keeper, though frustrated, bowed and retreated. A military official, close to the Eisenbergs, immediately stepped forward. "I also impeach Friedrich von Schmidt. He is insubordinate. At Blackstone Pass, he ignored orders to charge, risking the defense. At Osric Castle, he executed officials without trial, sidelined General Reynard, and stole warhorses meant for the relief of Conford. He ignores military law. He must be punished. These charges were far more severe, targeting core military discipline. The Eisenberg faction clearly wanted this uncontrollable talent removed. Sigmund roared again. Execute him. Hang his head, Your Majesty. Catherine cut him off sharply. She glared at the officer, weighing her options. Friedrich was a Tier 4 knight, a lion in battle, but he refused to bow to the Eisenbergs. Her father, Duke Eisenberg, had suggested he accidentally disappear. But killing him was impossible. He was a warrior who could cut through an army of 100,000 Solonians. He was also the Duke's heir. Killing him would mean open war with the South, which the bankrupt, embattled crown could not afford. Catherine spoke calmly. Friedrich is young and fierce. His actions were improper, but his intent was to fight the enemy. I grant him mercy, but discipline must be maintained. He is stripped of his command at Blackstone Pass and reassigned to Hohenheim as a cavalry captain. He is not to leave without orders. This was exile. She then ordered the provincial governors to the capital. Everyone knew the real agenda, rewarding last year's veterans and planning for the next war. With the border devastated and the treasury empty, they all knew the Solonians would return and the situation would be dire. The council ended. Ministers acted grave, but beneath the surface, they were scrambling for spoils, grain control, and shifting blame. They bowed and exited in order of rank. The heavy doors closed, sealing away their whispers. King Sigmund stretched, his boredom vanishing, replaced by manic excitement. Finally, that was agonizing. Bring in the dancers. I'm stifling. Servants rushed to comply, and a troupe of exotic dancers entered. They wore sheer silks, their movements fluid and graceful. As seductive music played, they danced, casting alluring glances. Sigmund watched, grinning, his eyes glued to the dancers. The king abandoned his throne, dragging a delicate court lady into the dance floor to frolic with the dancers. He behaved lewdly, pawing at the dancers and embracing the lady, utterly devoid of royal dignity. The council hall, once a solemn place for state affairs, was reduced to a den of debauchery under the silent gaze of imperial ancestors. Queen Mother Catherine watched her son's antics from her throne, her eyes flickering with disgust and helplessness. She remained silent. She had seen too much of this palace's absurdity to bother intervening. She rose, smoothed her gold-embroidered gown, and departed the noisy hall with her attendants. In the warm, spice-scented side chamber, Catherine shed her heavy, jewel-encrusted robes and collapsed onto a velvet bed in her nightgown, exhausted. She rubbed her throbbing temples, weary to her core. She had once thought the position of Queen Mother of the Plantagenet Kingdom was the pinnacle of glory. Now, she knew it was a poisoned chalice. The treasury was empty, the northern frontier was threatened by Solonian cavalry, and the capital was rife with rebellious nobles and bandits. As she fretted, the door opened and a tall figure entered. The man was handsome but carried a sinister air, his features bearing a striking resemblance to the dissolute young king. He sat by the bed and smirked at Catherine. So, the long council meeting is finally over? Catherine's icy facade melted instantly, replaced by a look of soft, girlish dependence. She snuggled into his arms like a tired cat, complaining, "Victor, you're so lucky. Those old fools in the court gave me a headache." This man was Mage Victor, Catherine's secret lover, her primary strategist, and the true father of King Sigmund. Their long-standing affair and the king's secret lineage remained hidden from the world. Victor stroked her waist, asking, "Any good news today?" Catherine replied triumphantly, "Louise has been married off to the Baron Confort. She'll never threaten Sigmund's throne again." Victor's eyes glinted. A good move, removing the former princess. But his tone darkened. The real challenge is just beginning. Powerful nobles like Rochefort and Schmidt are merely biding their time. They only submit because of the Eisenberg family's influence. Our goal is to centralize power and strip those nobles of their generational authority. Catherine looked at him with adoration. "I'll do whatever you say." Victor kissed her but frowned. "You must discipline your son. He's drowning in wine and women. How can he be a proper puppet like this?" Catherine sighed. "He's the king now. He won't listen. Why don't you talk to him?" Victor snorted, his expression a mix of disdain and paternal disappointment. "Forget it. He inherited my love for pleasure. I'll train him slowly. Catherine sniffed his clothes, asking curiously, "Where have you been? You smell strongly of herbs." Victor smirked, tracing the patterns on the bed. "Just researching magic. Have you heard? Conrad, that mage brother of mine, is the talk of the Royal Magic Academy. He demonstrated a device capable of controlling magical creatures, and the professors were full of praise." "Just a lucky little mage," Catherine scoffed, clutching Victor's sleeve. "I'll find an excuse to exile him to the frontier, just like Friedrich. Then the academy will be yours." Victor shook his head. "It's not that simple. The academy isn't like the court. You can't just manipulate it with politics. Talented people aren't so easily ousted. Besides, his mentors are stubborn old men. But don't worry, I'll surpass him with my own skills." Catherine purred. "I knew you were the best." 3 days later, the atmosphere in the Conford shantytown square was electric. A crude wooden platform had been erected overnight, featuring a dark, blood-stained execution block. Tommy from the Culture and Propaganda Department led youths through the streets, banging gongs and shouting, "Come see the execution of the Solonian spy." The news spread like wildfire. The residents, finally feeling a sense of belonging in their new home, were curious and outraged that a Solonian spy had infiltrated them. By noon, the square was packed with a tense, sweating crowd. People craned their necks, eager to see the traitor. A squad of grim soldiers marched a prisoner onto the platform. The spy's hands were bound, his clothes were rags, and his body was covered in scars from interrogation. Despite the biting spring wind, he stood tall, his eyes scanning the crowd with wolf-like ferocity, refusing to kneel. The soldiers barked orders, but he remained defiant. A burly executioner stepped forward and smashed a heavy wooden club into the spy's knees. With a sickening crunch, the spy's knees shattered, and he collapsed before the block. "Good," the crowd roared. The people's anger was ignited by the swift display of force. Tommy stepped onto the platform. He took a breath and shouted, "Citizens, look closely. This man is a Solonian spy who infiltrated Conford to sabotage our home and drag us back into the fires of war." Tommy's voice echoed across the square, silencing the crowd as all eyes turned to him and the kneeling spy. He miscalculated. Conford is not a place for them to act as they please. "Today, this traitor's head shall establish our iron law," Tommy shouted. "Anyone who betrays our kin or colludes with the enemy will be executed without mercy." "No mercy. Kill the dog." The crowd's pent-up fear and anger erupted into a deafening roar. The executioner stepped forward, raising his heavy blade, which glinted sharply in the sunlight. Without ceremony, the blade fell. Blood sprayed as the head was severed, rolling onto the platform while the headless body collapsed in a spasm. A collective gasp rippled through the square. Women shielded their children's eyes, and men drew sharp breaths. A deathly silence followed, thick with the scent of fresh blood. After a few seconds, a trembling voice cried out, "Good." The tension broke. "Well killed. Long live the Lord." The scattered cheers quickly swelled into a thunderous wave of sound. This fervor stemmed from genuine hatred for the spy, relief for their own safety, and a desperate need for the new refugees to prove their loyalty to Lord I and Conford. Watching the impassioned crowd, Tommy knew the public execution had achieved its purpose. He ordered the soldiers to dispose of the remains, the head and body to be displayed separately, and stepped down from the platform. The crowd remained, immersed in a complex mix of bloodlust, fear, excitement, and collective identity. As the people slowly dispersed, the buzz of conversation spread like a tide. They whispered excitedly, rehashing the bloody spectacle with a mixture of thrill and lingering dread. At the edge of the crowd, Franz from the Intelligence Bureau, disguised in rags, kept his head down while adjusting his straw sandals. His gaze, sharp as a hawk's, locked onto a stocky figure moving through the throng. Franz had been working as a laborer at Fort No. 3, where he had singled out this man for his odd behavior. The man had been there for half a month, appearing to be a hard-working, silent laborer. Yet, Franz had noticed several irregularities. At night, the man would draw complex patterns in the dirt and frequently cast lingering, suspicious glances toward the military camp and stables. During the execution, Franz had observed the man's reaction closely. The man's neck had stiffened, and his eyes betrayed not just fear, but a flicker of tense, sympathetic anger. It's him, Franz concluded. He stood up, brushed off the dust, and followed the stocky man into the crowd. The man, possessing strong counter-surveillance instincts, took a winding route toward the bustling, makeshift market in the shanty town. He stopped at a vegetable stall, feigning interest in prices while scanning his surroundings. Franz anticipated this, crouching by an old man's stall to inspect a broken bowl, blending perfectly into the background. The man continued, walking faster. Franz followed until the man suddenly ducked into a narrow, dark alley between shanties. Franz realized the man had either spotted him or was following a pre-planned escape route. He hurried forward, passing a peddler with a wooden box. A subtle nod confirmed the peddler was Ernst, his partner. As the man ran deeper into the alley, Franz shouted, "Stop, thief! He stole my wallet," to create a distraction. The man ignored the shout and sprinted toward the alley's exit. Ernst, positioned at the exit, accidentally collided with someone, spilling his box of needles and buttons, effectively blocking the path. The man stumbled, his momentum broken. In that instant, Franz lunged, pinning the man's arm and reaching for his neck to subdue him. The man fought back with trained, brutal efficiency, throwing elbows and knees. Franz continued to shout, "Damn thief! Stop resisting!" Ernst joined in, cursing, "You ruined my goods. Pay up," as he grabbed the man's other arm. Together, they pinned the struggling man into the mud. Ernst quickly bound the man's limbs with rope. Gasping for air, Franz told the gathering crowd, "Thief caught. Check your pockets. I'm taking him to the Lord's manor for the dungeon." The crowd instinctively checked their belongings. Franz and Ernst exchanged a look, hauled the still growling man up, and headed toward the castle. The onlookers dispersed, satisfied. The brief, violent arrest left only a ripple in the shanty town before calm returned. In the damp, dark dungeon, the stocky man was chained to the cold stone wall. Conford's dungeon remained unchanged. Its grim, terrifying atmosphere was deemed sufficient. Water seeped through the rough, unpolished stone walls, glinting in the flickering torchlight. The air reeked of mold, old blood, and torch smoke. Various rusted, menacing torture devices hung on the walls, silent testaments to the cruelty within. I arrived shortly, surprised by the Intelligence Bureau's swift success. Franz provided a concise report on the discovery, tracking, and capture. I nodded, looking at the silent prisoner. "Well done. He's no ordinary spy. His skills suggest we've caught a big fish." Richter stepped forward to begin the interrogation. Avoiding standard threats or immediate torture, he asked in a calm, conversational tone, "What is your name? Where is your home?" The man remained a silent, stone-like statue. Unsurprised, Richter signaled to Franz. Franz splashed freezing, concentrated brine onto the prisoner's wounds. The man shuddered, his body racked with agony, yet he bit his lip, suppressing any scream into a silent, strained whimper. Richter watched with an inscrutable expression. "Silence. No matter, we have time." Leaning in, Richter whispered, "Do you know why the man beheaded earlier had to die?" The prisoner remained silent, though his ear twitched. "Not for being a spy," Richter continued, "but for being useless. He offered nothing new, so he was only fit to serve as an example." Richter scrutinized him. "You are different. You are trained and intelligent. A smart man knows how to find a way to survive." The prisoner looked up, eyes flickering with pain and hesitation, before bowing his head back into silence. Richter's calm vanished, replaced by cold efficiency. He signaled the executioners. Two burly men grabbed the prisoner, forcing his fingers into a serrated wooden clamp. "Tighten," Richter commanded. As the clamp closed, the prisoner let out a piercing, agonizing scream, his body convulsing against the chains as sweat drenched his rags. After 30 seconds, Richter signaled to stop. Franz offered the gasping man water. Richter asked again, "Name? Mission?" The man shook his head, his eyes still defiant. "Rest," Richter said emotionlessly. "Then continue." Richter stepped back, leaving the prisoner to his ragged breathing. I watched from the shadows, arms crossed, my face devoid of excitement or pity. To me, this was merely a cold, necessary process to secure Conford's safety. I felt no personal hatred, only a desperate need for the information locked in the prisoner's mind. The methods used were simply tools to achieve that end. The interrogation continued, the air thick with the smell of blood and burning. Beyond finger-crushing, the executioners used barbed whips to lacerate the man's back. They then bound him to a bench, using bricks to hyperextend his joints, causing tearing pain. The cycle of torture, rest, and interrogation continued, designed to keep the prisoner on the brink of mental collapse without allowing him to recover. Yet, despite the agony, the man refused to speak, staring at his tormentors with bloodshot eyes. "He's a tough one," Richter muttered to me. "We may have caught a leader." I stepped forward, suggesting a technique from my past life. "Try waterboarding. Use absorbent paper over his nose and mouth." Richter immediately grasped the cruelty of the method and ordered it done. A damp, translucent sheet of mulberry paper was placed over the prisoner's face. His breathing was instantly obstructed, and he began to struggle, making muffled choking sounds. With each additional layer of wet paper, the suffocation intensified exponentially. The prisoner thrashed, his chains clattering violently. His face turned purple, his eyes bulging with the primal terror of death. This slow, deliberate deprivation of life proved far more effective at breaking his will than physical pain. Just as the man began to lose consciousness, Richter signaled to stop. The paper was ripped away, and the prisoner gasped greedily for air, sobbing and trembling. Richter seized the moment. "Speak. Name. Mission." The man lay limp, his eyes filled with the fear of death, but he remained silent. "Continue," Richter ordered. The process of suffocation and interrogation was repeated 3 more times. By the 4th time, the prisoner's defenses finally shattered. "I'll talk. Please stop," he wheezed. Richter paused. "Name? Where are you from?" "Thompson. I'm from the northern frontier," the man gasped. "The castle fell years ago. The Solonians captured my family." "Your mission? Your rank?" Richter pressed. "I'm a captain of the action squad," Thompson confessed. "General Leon sent me 2 months ago with 6 men, disguised as refugees." "Where are the others?" "Names. Besides the one you killed, there are 5. Jack, David, Harrison, Fred, and Lawrence. They are scattered at the construction site, the shanty town, and near the Tunbeo granary and smithy. I don't know their exact hideouts. We use single-line contact." Richter noted the details and ordered the executioners to give the man food and water. He and I stepped out into the fresher air of the corridor. "My lord," Richter asked for instructions. "Investigate these leads immediately," I ordered. "But do not stop the interrogation." I added coldly. "This could be a fabrication to buy time. Verify everything while keeping the pressure on until we are certain." "Understood," Richter replied, heading off to organize the search. On the Conford Plains, the air was cold and dry. The wasteland between the castle and the shanty town had been transformed into a training ground for the new army. Following the wedding and the arrival of the Duchess's caravan, confidence surged among the refugees. Within days, the army grew rapidly, reaching 2,500 soldiers after rigorous selection. I organized 2,500 refugees into a full infantry regiment. Recruitment followed strict criteria, moving beyond mere physical strength. Priority was given to courage, defined as composure under pressure and combat experience. Veterans of border skirmishes, anti-bandit raids, or survivors of defeated units were preferred. Their familiarity with the brutality of war and unit formations made them easier to train than raw farmers. The second criterion was attachment. Unlike the common preference for unattached bachelors, I favored those with families. Wives, children, and elderly parents provided tangible responsibilities. Such soldiers were more disciplined and resilient under the hardships of training and the fear of battle. Desertion would mean abandoning their families to the harsh consequences of military law and loss of protection. The survival of their families acted as an invisible, effective tether ensuring stability. These 2,500 men were the elite selection from 30,000 refugees, forming a complete infantry regiment. This size was chosen for its tactical utility, large enough for a resilient, impactful, grand square formation. It remained manageable for a commander and staff to control via flags, horns, drums, and vocal commands. This allowed me to focus on perfecting this single anvil or hammer rather than complex multi-unit coordination. However, Building a disciplined army takes time. The new regiment was far from the precision machine I envisioned. Advanced tactics like multi-branch coordination and emergency maneuvers remained beyond their current grasp. Training focused strictly on foundational drills and squad-level cohesion. The training ground was a scene of organized chaos. Shouts, clashing metal, and the heavy rhythm of marching feet filled the air. Pikemen practiced repetitive, lethal thrusts against straw dummies clad in leather armor.